Lord of Mysteries, Incarnation of Chaos by author Yu Shang Wu Wang Chuan. Chapter 351-375. Chapter 351, Little K refuses social death. I don't think I have anything to explain. Little K is my teacher. Isn't it only right for me to bring a friend to visit my teacher? Amon was much calmer than Antigonus. He raised a hand to push up his monocle, smiling as he spoke. Roland glanced at him, then chuckled, saying, "It's better that way." Roland then looked at the other two in the room and asked, "Do you two have anything to say?" Amon and Mr. Antigonus, they really didn't hurt me. They just asked me some things about you, Little K honestly stated, then added, "Of course, I didn't tell them anything. Little K really didn't reveal your information to them. In fact, Little K was trying to trick information out of them. I could tell," the little Amon next to him chimed in. However, as soon as he said that, a hint of awkwardness appeared on Little K's face. After all, trying to trick information out of someone is one thing, being pointed out directly is another. Roland, in his Lucifer persona, also glanced at Little K, chuckled, then shook his head and said, "Never mind. It's good that you all have a sense of propriety." He then looked at Jack beside him and said, "Didn't you keep clamoring about giving Little K a gift earlier? Now that you've seen him, why are you so quiet? Aren't I giving you face, old guy? If I spoke up, how would you scold them?" Jack Jones looked at Lucifer strangely, stating it as a matter of course. "So, should I praise you for being so obedient and sensible?" Lucifer's words made it impossible to tell if he was being sarcastic or sincere. "That's not necessary. After all, facts don't need to be emphasized," Jack Jones said without any politeness. Then he looked at Little K, enthusiastically handing over the book, First-Rate Detective, saying, "Little K, here you go. It's been a long time. This is the gift I brought you, Furz's latest masterpiece." Little K had this day finally arrived. Little K recalled, with a touch of pain, how Jack had once excitedly told him about wanting to commission a novel from Magician, and he felt his vision go black. He stiffly took the book Jack handed him. After opening the flyleaf, he was hit hard again. What does Detective Sir dream of puppet girls even mean? What kind of story is this? Little K's mouth twitched. Adhering to the principle a short pain is better than long pain, he continued to flip through and quickly reached the table of contents. Just a glance made him lose the courage to continue reading. Honestly, just from the cover, Little K could already imagine what kind of dramatic detective supernatural romance story this was. To be honest, as a transmigrator, Little K had read many convoluted romance stories before. If the protagonist of this book wasn't named Sherlock, and if the story wasn't a fabricated tale based on him and Miss Sharon, Little K wouldn't have reacted this way. But, reading fanfiction about his own romance was indeed a bit too much. Especially, Little K thought about Magician's reputation and how popular this book would be in the future, and his vision grew even darker. Yet, Jack didn't let him off. The companion, who was essentially a black sesame dumpling, leaned over at this moment and said with a grin, "Besides this one, Miss Furz has also finished the beginning of Bounty Hunter and Pirate Queen. Clara's love story is just an outline, but when I saw her last time, I gave her some suggestions, mainly providing character settings for the female lead's love interest, such as a romantic green-eyed poet, an innocent noble lady. MMMPH. This time, before Jack could finish his sentence, Little K finally couldn't bear it anymore and reached out to cover his mouth. The latter was somewhat frustrated and incredulous, saying, "Wait, since it's the female lead's lover, why would an innocent noble lady appear?" Roland, in his Jack persona, broke free from his hand and answered as a matter of course, because this book, besides BG, also has light Yuri content. Of course, I prefer to call it girlfriend's affection. Little K. At that moment, Little K didn't know whether to marvel at how diverse his companion's shipping tastes were, or at how truly extensive Miss Furz's range was, daring to write anything. Little K just took a deep breath, but couldn't calm his agitated emotions. He looked at his companion and said sincerely, "Why don't you just stick to pure love? Really, don't ship so many different things." He really didn't want the market to be flooded with various fanfiction romance stories about him, and even fanfiction romance stories with different people. But these CPs are really good to ship. As the saying goes, shipping everything only allows me to have a balanced diet. I'm not picky. Roland looked at him somewhat innocently and said, if you really mind, little K, you can also ship my CP. I don't mind. Ship your CP. Do you even have a CP? Wait, I don't have a CP either. Little K stared at his companion, feeling a deep sense of helplessness. He really wanted to retaliate, but he truly couldn't force pairings or even gender-bent CPs like his companion did. Little K's integrity wouldn't allow him to do that. Sigh. Little K finally could only sigh and say, do whatever you want. He chose to give up. As for those fanfiction romance stories, as long as he didn't read them, he could pretend nothing happened. Really? Roland's eyes lit up slightly, and he said almost impatiently, you finally agreed to let me write a romance story about you gender bent into a witch and a witch. Only that one is not allowed. Little K interrupted with a darkened face. He had his bottom line too. Oh. Roland immediately showed a disappointed expression, seemingly very regretful. While Little K felt his world collapse due to the fanfiction romance stories, Roland, in his Lucifer persona, looked at the wolf and crow beside him and said, if you two have nothing else to do, why don't you come with me to see Saussure? I happen to have some work for you, considering you don't seem to need this 3-day holiday very much. The last sentence was naturally directed at Antigonus. Oh. Antigonus responded somewhat aggrievedly, but dared not refute. Amon then raised a hand to push up his monocle and said, is it about establishing the rules? We always need to make some preparations in advance. Roland did not deny it, nodding. As for the preparations he mentioned, they were simple. It was certainly not easy to make an entire city of people believe in the existence of a certain rule. However, if the rule could be made to exist through extraordinary means, at least on the surface, and then people were made to believe, it would be much simpler. And Antigonus, as an king of angels of full pathway, could undoubtedly play a role in this, such as monitoring the entire city and timely masquerading as the rule-taking action. It would be difficult for other pathways to achieve this, but for Full Pathway, it was considered a professional match. Chapter 352, The Correct Way to Use Amon. Antigonus's 3-day holiday ended early because he joined Amon in courting death. This clearly dealt a blow to the demonic wolf, causing his ears to droop, but the ruthless boss Roland did not soften his heart. Instead, he directly brought Antigonus to where Saussure was. At that time, Saussure, uncharacteristically, was not working but was reading a book related to law. Roland glanced at the desk in front of him, and sure enough, besides some processed work documents, there were various reference books related to law. In addition, there were also books introducing the customs of various countries, including Loan. Evidently, Saussure appeared not to be working, but he was still working. Reading these books was most likely for reference in formulating rules. Do the laws of this era also have reference value? Roland asked with a hint of curiosity. At least it allows me to better understand the current state of this world, so it has some reference value. Saussure put down the book in his hand. He was not surprised by Roland's arrival. He just looked at the majestic large dog beside Roland with a slight surprise, and after a brief stun, he seemed to recall something and said, Antigonus. It was no wonder Saussure reacted this way. After all, in his era, Antigonus was still an unknown nobody. In this era, before Roland made his move, Antigonus had already lost control and was locked up by the Evernight goddess. Saussure had no chance to get to know him, so it was a testament to Saussure's good memory that he could even remember him. Compared to Saussure, who needed to recall, Antigonus clearly recognized the famous Dark Angel at a glance. He was not surprised to see him in this era, mainly because Amon had already popular science him about Lucifer's miraculous abilities, but Antigonus was still a bit nervous and spoke with a slight awkwardness, Hello, Mr. Saussure. Although they were both King of Angels, the value of King of Angels varied. Saussure, as a clone of the Sun God, the former Heavenly Kingdom vice-monarch, and later the true creator, was a father-level figure in Antigonus's eyes. Facing such an existence, it was impossible not to be nervous. Especially in the fourth epoch, Antigonus worked for Tutor for a long time, which meant he stood on the opposite side of the true creator. Saussure could not help but notice Antigonus's nervousness, which made him give Antigonus a gentle and comforting smile, and then looked at Roland. Antigonus is my new subordinate. He will assist you in establishing rules later. Roland met Saucerier's gaze and smiled. He did not beat around the bush and simply explained his thoughts, finally saying, although you definitely won't be able to finish writing the complete set of rules anytime soon, for a pilot program, there's no need to implement the full version all at once. You can try implementing 1 or 2 simple rules first. Are there any rules you have already finalized? Saucerier showed a thoughtful expression upon hearing this. He then pulled out a notebook from the pile of books next to him. Inside, it was densely filled with various rules, some repeatedly crossed out, some directly struck through, and some written with a checkmark and the words, pending. Clearly, Saucerier had not been idle during this time and had been seriously contemplating the establishment of rules. Saucerier turned the notebook to one page, circled 2 rules with a pen, and said, these 2 rules should not have any major problems and can be implemented directly. Roland glanced at them and saw that they were 2 rules that were simple yet complex. The first one, in summary, was prohibition of killing, but besides the simple prohibition, there were many additions, such as exceptions for law enforcement personnel in necessary situations, self-defense, and so on. The second rule was also very simple, which could be summarized as, those who help others can obtain good luck, but this rule had fewer additions than the previous one. Evidently, Saucerier chose to be conservative and did not implement very strict rules at the outset. Roland stared at these 2 rules for a while, without directly expressing any opinions. He simply took the densely written notebook from Saucerier's hand, read it carefully, and then suddenly smiled, saying, you seem to have only stipulated that those who help others can obtain good luck. Why not stipulate that those who harm others will encounter misfortune? Upon hearing this, Saucerier looked at Roland with a hint of helplessness. He did not believe Roland did not know the reason, but the other party was clearly asking on purpose. Saucerier then replied, harming others is a very difficult thing to define. Besides the most direct harm like murder and arson, many things have 2 sides. For example, the invention of the steam engine is a good thing for many people, but for some, it is a bad thing, it harms them. If I really stipulate that harming others will result in punishment, everyone will live restricted, and this world will have no future. Saucerier saw this point very clearly, which is why he spent a great deal of effort studying the laws and customs of this era, striving to formulate the most suitable rules, rather than simply making a blanket rule. But isn't helping others also a very difficult thing to define? Roland retorted with a smile, is it considered help to intentionally create a difficult situation and then play the hero to save the damsel? Saucerier froze for a moment. He then reached out and rubbed his temples, saying, I overlooked that. During this time, he had been thinking about various prohibitions and had overlooked the hidden dangers within the rule of helping others. No need to rush. Even the best rules will have loopholes. After all, you are not an omniscient and omnipotent God. We just need to avoid loopholes to the greatest extent possible. As for how to plug those unavoidable loopholes, that naturally depends on the future law enforcers. Roland smiled indifferently, returning the notebook to Saucerier, and said, these 2 rules are fine. You can refine the second one later, and we can implement them in the pilot program. Don't worry, even if there are major problems, with the pilot in place, we can correct them in time. Rather, isn't that the meaning of a pilot program? You are right. Saucerier would not wallow in self-pity because of this. He nodded, took the notebook, and a hint of contemplation appeared between his brows, clearly already thinking about how to improve the second rule. Roland, as if he had thought of something else, glanced at Amon, who was watching the show beside him. He suddenly smiled and said to Saucerier, actually, you can refer to your good son's opinions on this matter. Amon may not be good at other things, but he is an expert at exploiting loopholes. There is no one more suitable than him to identify and fix deficiencies. This is like having an escape expert formulate anti-escape rules for a prison, essentially using a bug to fix a bug. Chapter 353, Go 3 Family Angels Meeting. Amon was stunned, clearly not expecting to be targeted just for coming to watch the show. Saucerier's eyes, however, lit up slightly. He looked at Amon, and though he said nothing, his gaze was filled with clear expectation. Amon, who had intended to refuse, found himself unable to utter a word of rejection in the face of such a look. Although he never confused Saucerier with the sun god, Amon had feelings for Saucerier, his second father, due to his experiences since childhood. So, after hesitating for less than a second, Amon raised his hand, pushed up the monocle on his face, and said with a smile, I am very willing to contribute to the new world. Upon hearing this, Saussure immediately showed a relieved smile. Antigonus, on the other hand, looked at Amon with a look as if he had seen a ghost. Ever since he had reawakened in this world, he felt his worldview being constantly refreshed, and the world had become unrecognizable. Among them, his old friend Amon was undoubtedly the most prominent. What turned you into this? Antigonus's large wolf eyes rotated once, finally settling on Roland. Is something wrong, Antigonus? Roland noticed his gaze and looked at him with a smile. Nothing. Antigonus shook his head frantically without a second's hesitation, then glanced at Amon again, feeling like he understood. Roland didn't care what nonsense the dog was thinking. He continued discussing the new rules with Saussure, even involving Amon in the discussion, and thus spent the entire day. When the moon appeared, the discussion had concluded. Roland finalized the 2 rules to be implemented in Border City, writing them down in the story book. All that remained was for the various promotional arrangements to be in place for the rules to officially take effect. Ah, I almost forgot, it's a full moon today. Roland looked up at the crimson moon in the sky and remarked with a sigh. Is there something wrong with the full moon? Antigonus asked with a slight puzzlement, looking a bit dispirited. This wasn't due to anything else, but mainly because he had listened to a lot of things during the day that he didn't quite understand but needed to listen to carefully. Yes, the full moon means I should fish out Bethel. Roland said matter-of-factly, with a very expectant smile. Amon heard this without surprise, nearly raising his hand to pinch his monocle, his expression slightly complex, unsure of what he was thinking. Antigonus, however, seemed to have thought of something, and his expression also became complex, but different from Amon's, primarily filled with sympathy. Clearly, Antigonus was recalling his own unbearable memories from when he was fished out. Roland glanced at the 2 of them, smiled and shook his head, saying nothing. He merely looked at Saussure, who was organizing today's discussion content, and said, Saussure, I am about to summon Bethel, so I can only ask you to return first. Wait a moment, give me 3 more minutes. Saussure was clearly not surprised by this. He sped up his organizing, and 2 minutes later, he looked up and said, I'm ready. Then, see you tomorrow, Saussure. Roland bid farewell to Saussure with a smile, then seamlessly summoned Mr. Door from the past. The familiar figure materialized in the air. Mr. Door from the past opened his eyes, and after seeing Amon and Antigonus beside him, he paused, then curled his lips and said, Is this a meeting of the Go3 family? Having spent so much time with Roland, Mr. Door had clearly learned some specific nicknames, such as Go3 family and all 5 families. I rather think this scene is closer to the time Tudor gathered us for a meeting. Amon said with a smile. Then, who is the Blood Emperor? Antigonus blinked, asking a crucial question. Thus, 3 pairs of eyes simultaneously looked at Roland. How sad. Am I really a lunatic like the Blood Emperor in your eyes? Roland feigned sadness. Amon looked up at him and said with a smile, Aren't you? I didn't mean that. Antigonus quickly shook his head, disassociating himself. Mr. Door from the past hesitated for a second, then tactfully said, As far as I know, Tudor shouldn't be as crazy as you. At least he couldn't threaten the sun god with world destruction. Only his slightly curled lips revealed that this was just a joke. Roland raised his eyes upon hearing this, his golden eyes sweeping over the 3 Go3 family angels present. Then he showed a brilliant smile and said, If you are looking forward to it, it's not that I can't let you relive Tudor's Iron Fist. Although I'm not as good at fighting, I can call for backup. It is well known that Tudor's ability to suppress the Go3 family angels beneath him back then relied on nothing else but his iron fists. His main tactic was to beat them if they didn't obey, literally beating the 3 restless fellows into submission. I'm not that nostalgic. Amon's smile stiffened slightly. He knew very well that while Roland's words might be a joke to others, they might become true for him. His teacher, when it came to beating him, had always spared no effort and would never miss an opportunity to reasonably beat him. Lord, I am innocent, none of this has anything to do with me. Antigonus stated that he didn't want to be implicated by his 2 former colleagues at all. Bethel looked at the reactions of his 2 former colleagues and paused, saying somewhat unexpectedly, I thought this was just a joke. He looked at Roland for confirmation. Isn't this a joke? Of course, it's a joke. Roland nodded. For Mr. Dorr, whom he always respected, this was naturally just a harmless joke. Roland merely glanced at Amon inadvertently, and seeing him wisely keeping to himself, he couldn't help but let out a tisk after finishing. Amon had been quite well behaved lately, and he couldn't find an opportunity to beat him. Alas, Amon, not surprised at all, but could only offer a faint smile. Ever since meeting Roland, Amon had truly deeply realized what it meant for people to pay the price for what they've done. Even though he had changed, someone's desire to beat him whenever an opportunity arose had never changed because of his past actions. The key was, even if he was beaten, Amon wasn't someone who couldn't take a beating. The crucial part was that Roland not only beat him but also liked to call his father to beat him, which was a bit unbearable for Amon. But who could he blame? Little Crow sighed and silently withdrew into himself. Roland didn't care what Amon was thinking. After the joke, he looked at Bethel and said directly, "Bethel, I want to enter the space where you are sealed." This was also the reason Roland summoned Bethel from the past. Clearing pollution could be done remotely, but to perform surgery to balance the pollution, Roland had to personally operate on Bethel. However, Roland couldn't release Bethel when the pollution hadn't been balanced yet, as the risk would be too great. The mobility of the door pathway meant that once an accident occurred, even a sequence 0 might not be able to catch him. Although Roland trusted Bethel's will, there was no need to take that risk. Therefore, Roland decided to ask Bethel from the past for help, allowing him to directly enter the alien space where Bethel was confined. Others couldn't do this, but Bethel might be able to. Chapter 354, The Understanding Between Amon and Bethel. The Bethel from the past was startled by these words, and he said with some confusion, "I can open a one-way door, ensuring we can go in, and the me inside the door won't come out. It's just." The Bethel from the past paused here, his expression becoming more serious, and he said, "To prevent the future me from coming out, the seal on the different space was made very cleverly. It can basically only be opened from the outside. If we go in without preparation, even I would find it difficult to open a passage from the inside, so I need to prepare some things in advance." Mr. Dorr had naturally made thorough preparations back then to prevent his corrupted self from wreaking havoc on Earth. Thus, even Mr. Dorr himself found it difficult to open the seal of the different space from the inside. Of course, this was based on the premise of no preparation. If the corresponding rituals and materials were prepared in advance, it wouldn't be particularly difficult for Mr. Dorr to open a passage outwards from the inside. Roland was not surprised by this. He simply asked Mr. Dorr what he needed and had someone prepare it. During the preparation period, the Bethel from the past evidently thought of something else and looked at Roland, asking, "Has something unexpected happened?" He and Roland had known each other for so long, and Roland had never shown any intention of visiting him in the different space. Today, however, he suddenly had such a plan, so Bethel was naturally curious about what had happened. Roland had no intention of hiding anything. He quickly explained his plan to use Nyarlathotep's power to balance the outer god's corruption. To reassure Bethel, he specifically added, "I already have a successful case, it's the Black Emperor Rosal from later generations. You should know him. Besides that, I've also mastered a small trick of using my power to help others suppress the celestial worthies' will." But, Roland hesitated here, saying, "Considering Bethel's capacity to endure, let's just forget it. Bethel, you should still rely on yourself first." With both balancing corruption and suppressing the celestial worthies' will, Roland was truly afraid that Bethel wouldn't be able to handle it. Bethel was clearly stunned by these words. He evidently hadn't expected that the corruption that had plagued him for so long would actually have a day when it could be resolved. Even if it wasn't completely eradicated, being able to balance the corruption and gain freedom, no longer interfered with by the outer gods, what difference was there from complete eradication? As for the other thing Roland mentioned, Bethel didn't care. He wasn't Antigonus, Bethel's will wasn't fragile. Although the celestial worthy was also a problem for him, it truly hadn't reached the point where external help was needed. Also, let me give you a heads up. Although I have experience, the pain during the treatment process is still unavoidable. Bethel, please prepare yourself mentally, Roland added. This was the truth. Although his current technique was definitely more skilled than when he treated Rosal, some pain and some madness were unavoidable. Even Roland could only slightly mitigate them, not change their fundamental nature. I understand. I will prepare myself mentally. The Bethel from the past nodded. Although he hadn't undergone theshurgery yet, he had already removed corruption several times, so he naturally knew it wouldn't be an easy process. But no matter what kind of pain, he could endure it, as long as he could truly gain freedom. All right then, shall we depart now? Roland didn't say anything more, just asked. The Bethel from the past nodded. Amon then spoke, perhaps you too will need my help. For example, holding Bethel down when he struggles. As someone who had participated in multiple surgical treatments, Amon was clearly very familiar with the process. Roland thought about it and felt it was right. He indeed needed someone to help hold Bethel down, so he nodded. Since Amon was going, Roland naturally looked at Antigonus beside him and asked, do you want to come along? Antigonus was clearly hesitant, but he glanced at Bethel and still nodded. Unlike Amon, Antigonus actually had a decent relationship with Mr. Door back then. Although it wasn't particularly good, there was some camaraderie. So, on such an important matter concerning whether Bethel could break free from the outer god's control, he naturally wanted to join in the fun. The Bethel from the past glanced at his two colleagues who were clearly enjoying the spectacle and not minding the trouble, and he didn't object, nodding. In any case, he believed that with Roland present, neither Amon nor Antigonus would be able to stir up any trouble. So, once the things Bethel needed were ready, the group set off directly. Because there was an King of Angels of the Door pathway, they quickly arrived near the different space where Mr. Door was sealed. The Bethel from the past asked Roland to wait, and he himself began setting up outside the different space. A few minutes later, the Bethel from the past completed all preparations and looked at Roland and the others, saying, it's ready. As soon as he finished speaking, a huge door appeared beside them. Then let's go save the Tower Princess. Roland joked. He raised his hand, pushed open the door, and with one step, found himself in a completely unfamiliar space. However, this space was filled with corrupting power that made Roland frown. And not far away, there was a figure familiar to Roland. The person's appearance was identical to the Bethel of the past, but he was more gaunt, and his eyes held the vicissitudes of having experienced many things. He was clearly conscious, and upon seeing Roland, he smiled and said, should I say, nice to meet you for the first time, Lucifer. I think, long time no see, is more appropriate. Roland smiled, then sensed several figures behind him. It was Amon and the others. Bethel, long time no see. Amon raised a hand and pushed up the monocle on his face. He gazed at his old friend, revealing a slightly nostalgic smile, and said, I never expected our reunion to be in such a setting. I originally thought we would reunite upon your demise. Amon understood Bethel, so he was very clear that the other party would absolutely not surrender to the outer gods. And with the external corruption unable to be resolved, Bethel's reunion with him would only be under one circumstance. Bethel would return in a corrupted state, thus completing his deity ascension ritual. However, he would not become the god who brought disaster to the world. He would voluntarily allow Amon to steal his deity ascension ritual, using his death to complete Amon, becoming a catalyst for Amon to become the Lord of the Mysteries. This was their understanding, an unspoken understanding between two King of Angels who had worked together for many years. Although Bethel also knew that Amon might not be the most reliable choice, without knowing of Klein's existence, Amon was Bethel's only option. But evidently, none of this would happen now. Are you disappointed? Bethel clearly saw what Amon was thinking. He revealed a faint smile and asked. Chapter 355 You will no longer be desperate, Bethel. A little, but not much. Amon raised his hand and pinched the monocle on his face, saying, after all, even in the original destiny, I couldn't achieve the final victory, so why regret it? Amon hadn't been idle during this time. He had already inquired about some of the original destinies, as Roland had no intention of hiding anything. You're quite open-minded. Thinking about it this way, I've gained a huge advantage. Bethel could naturally tell that Amon's words weren't a pretense but what he truly felt. Actually, I'm very happy. Amon continued, looking at Bethel's slightly surprised expression, and hooked the corner of his mouth, saying, I don't have many old friends, and you are one. Losing you would be somewhat regrettable. Bethel was stunned for a moment. He looked up at Amon, and after a few seconds, he suddenly smiled and said, Amon, it seems you've changed a lot too. I've learned a lot of new knowledge recently, so naturally, I've changed somewhat. Amon didn't deny it. He just unhurriedly took off the monocle on his face, wiped it with a handkerchief he pulled out from who knows where, and after putting it back on, Amon looked at Bethel with sharp eyes and said, However, even for an old friend, if you want me to give up the Marauder uniqueness, you have to convince me. Bethel, I'm really looking forward to your strength after you recover. We didn't have the chance back then, but now we can finally have a good match. Speaking of this, Amon looked at Roland and said, Although I know that the Lord of the Mysteries you expect isn't me, this world has always respected the strong. If I can achieve the final victory, I wonder if I'll get that opportunity. Roland smiled when he heard this. He watched Amon with a half-smile, not answering, but it was already an answer. Amon naturally understood Roland's meaning. He sighed and said with emotion, You are truly biased. I've always been biased. Roland had no intention of denying it. He smiled and said, Just as you said, this world is a jungle where the strong prey on the weak. I'm stronger than you, so you can only listen to me, Amon. Roland never denied that he was a biased guy. Amon was never on his list for the Lord of the Mysteries. Even if he seemed to have changed now, Roland would not put him back on the list. He only favored two people. You are truly candid. Amon was clearly not surprised by this answer, and his expression wasn't exactly disappointed. He just continued to look at Bethel and said, Although I don't have a chance, I still hope to have a good match with you in the future, just to erase my last bit of unwillingness, old friend. Bethel looked deeply at Amon, not refusing. The King of Angels, once closest to a god, showed a proud smile at this moment, looking at Amon and saying, I will make you lose convincingly, Amon. I'm looking forward to it. Amon raised his hand and pushed the monocle on his face. Although he said he was looking forward to it, from his neither humble nor arrogant attitude, Amon clearly had enough confidence in himself. Roland looked at the two of them clashing and suddenly thought of something. He reached out and poked Antigonus, who was also an King of Angels of the Go-3 family, and said with a smile, It should be a movie for 3 people, but you have no part in it, little one. What do you think about this? Antigonus looked at the two former colleagues who were clashing but had completely ignored him by common consent. He felt a bit stifled for a moment, but he also knew the gap between them in his heart, so he could only say dejectedly, I really can't compare to them. They are better than me. Poor puppy. Roland reached out and ruffled the demon wolf's head, then looked at Mr. Dorr and said, Get ready, Bethel, we're going to start the surgery now. Oh, right. Roland suddenly thought of something and looked at Bethel, saying, Bethel, have you ever despaired? Bethel was stunned when he heard this. After a few seconds of silence, he nodded and said candidly, I have despaired. In the past 1,000 years, I have despaired more than once. This was nothing to be ashamed of. Bethel had indeed despaired. In those years of unconsciousness, in the days when he knew he was beyond help, even Mr. Dorr, who was closest to a god, had experienced despair. However, even in despair, he never gave in, but quietly prepared to dedicate everything to this world. Then, can you lend me your despair? Roland paused here, then he smiled and said, That way, you won't despair anymore. Bethel was stunned for a moment. He looked at the young man who had changed his destiny, suddenly smiled, and then nodded solemnly, saying, Okay. The process of Bethel's surgery went smoothly. After all, Roland had accumulated a lot of experience during this time and was no longer the clumsy novice he was during his first attempt. But even so, the entire surgery process was still not easy. Although Bethel did not experience the various temporary madness states like Rosal, he inevitably experienced temporary madness. Fortunately, Roland might not be proficient in other things, but treating temporary madness was a piece of cake for him. He quickly dealt with Bethel's temporary madness, not letting Bethel suffer too much from it. However, beyond that, the madness, the distortion, and the chaos that affected Bethel were still things that Roland found difficult to completely eliminate. When the surgery was over, Bethel lay quietly on the hospital bed, his somewhat dazed eyes showing his condition. Not silly, right? Roland waved his hand above Bethel, asking tentatively, his tone unusually cautious. Quote. I'm fine, I just feel like I've been reborn. Bethel forced a smile. Although he was not in good shape, he still chose to comfort Roland first. You might as well just say you feel like you died once. Amon translated while raising his hand and pushing the monocle on his face. Antigonus, meanwhile, had already puffed up into a large ball beside them. Witnessing Mr. Door's surgery brought back some unpleasant memories for him. Only you can talk. Roland gave Amon a cold glance, then looked at Bethel, saying with a somewhat embarrassed smile, is it really that bad? I thought my skills should have improved. No, it's certainly uncomfortable, but it's within tolerable limits. Bethel shook his head, then he sat up and said, compared to the pain, I prefer this feeling of ease now. Bethel spoke from the bottom of his heart. Although the pain during the treatment was somewhat unbearable, the feeling of no longer being controlled by outer god pollution after the treatment made Bethel feel even more at ease. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 356 He is going home. That's good. Roland could naturally tell what Bethel was thinking, so he also smiled, then remembered something and said, although the pollution in your body has temporarily reached a balance and will no longer affect you, this is not a true cleansing after all. To prevent accidents, it's best if you don't advance to sequence 0 for a while. You should be able to suppress it, right? Roland asked with some uncertainty at the end of his sentence. He knew that Mr. Door could have become a god as early as the 4th epoch, but considering the influence of the celestial venerable, he had always used the sealed authority to prevent himself from becoming a god. However, he was really unsure whether the current Mr. Door could control himself from advancing. Although it's a bit difficult, I can temporarily control myself from advancing, Bethel nodded, then asked. It's just, I don't know how long I need to suppress it. Although I'm not in a hurry to advance to sequence 0, there are only a dozen years left until the apocalypse, and I need to make some preparations in advance. This was the truth. Although Bethel longed to become stronger, after so many years, he was naturally not in a hurry for these 10 or 20 years. However, the Earth's barrier could only last for another dozen years. To ensure that Earth had enough power to resist outer gods by then, the Lord of the Mysteries had to be born before the Earth's barrier shattered. Don't worry, it won't take that long, not even a dozen years. After I perform a few more operations, I'll pretty much have this thoroughly understood, and then it'll be fine. Roland waved his hand, smiling as he said. And even though you can't advance to sequence 0, the pollution cleansing work can still continue. Even if there are no other methods, systematically removing the pollution at the current speed won't take many years to complete. Just wait patiently. Bethel felt relieved upon hearing this. He nodded and said, good, I will wait for that day. Then Bethel showed a gentle smile. He looked at Roland and said, before that, is there anything I can help with? You're on the right track. Bethel, you truly live up to being my favorite Go-3 family angel, your awareness is just different. Roland's eyes lit up, and he immediately gave Bethel a big thumbs up. Then, without being polite, he directly said, there are indeed many places where I need your help. For example, in a while, I'm going to the Mother Tree to snatch back the god of the bound Tulsana. If Bethel, you can come and help, it should reduce a lot of trouble. Bethel was stunned for a moment upon hearing this, probably not expecting Roland to play such a big game, but when he thought of Roland's usual style, he felt relieved. Without any excuses, Bethel directly nodded and said, I have no problem, but I'm afraid I alone won't be able to snatch back the god of the bound Tulsana from the Mother Tree. Don't worry, the main force is the Sun God. Bethel, you'll be responsible for sealing space, providing mobility, and ensuring that those heteromorphic beyonders from the Rose School of Thought don't run around. Roland waved his hand and said. Bethel was not surprised by this outcome, but he felt a little more at ease. Besides that, Roland blinked, looked at Bethel, and said, Bethel, do you want to make the Abraham family great again? Bethel was stunned for a moment. The leap between the two topics was too large for him to react immediately. But Roland's words also stirred Bethel's memories, making him recall the flourishing appearance of the Abraham family in the past, and also remember the current decline of the Abraham family. Bethel sighed. He did not regret what he had done over the past 1,000 years. Although it led to the decline of the Abraham family, if Bethel had not done so, he, in his polluted state, would probably have been released by the Abraham family long ago. By then, not only would this world suffer a great disaster, but the Abraham family would also not have a good outcome, perhaps having been completely wiped out long ago. However, even though he knew rationally that he had done nothing wrong, emotionally, Bethel still couldn't help but feel guilty. But guilt aside, Bethel still understood Roland to some extent, so he looked at Roland, asking with a mix of curiosity and helplessness, "What do you want to do?" "Don't be so wary, Bethel, I won't eat them," Roland said with a smile. He slowly continued, "I just need some beyonders of the door pathway. This pathway is extremely useful, yet the personnel are too scarce. I have to say, this is a pity. Now that you can finally return, it's natural to make up for this regret." In Roland's view, the door pathway was basically one of the most useful pathways, especially its high mobility and spatial attributes. Whether used in war or daily life, it had huge room for development. Aside from anything else, if the mechanical laboratory could mass-produce beyonder items of the door pathway, even if it couldn't realize the travel ability or the popularization of spatial pouches, even if it could only be used in a few areas, it could still play a huge role. Such a treasure pathway, apart from Bethel, couldn't even find a few Sequence 5s. Most of the characteristics within this pathway were vacant, which was a complete waste. Of course, Roland was not an unreasonable person, and he would not force the Abraham family to offer characteristics to cultivate beyonders. But if they didn't cultivate outsiders, cultivating their own people was fine, right? Roland wasn't picky. As long as he had people to use then, he didn't care whether they were named Abraham. Bethel glanced at Roland, probably guessing what he was thinking, and couldn't help but smile helplessly, then said, "Since I have returned, the Abraham family will naturally no longer lack beyonders, and they will be very happy to contribute to your cause." Bethel was very clear that since the Abraham family had been targeted by Roland, escaping was useless. Instead of escaping, it was better to openly cultivate their clansmen and let them work for the other party. This way, Roland would instead give the Abraham family some preferential treatment. And to be honest, working for Roland was really not a bad thing. Such a super powerful backer, how many people wanted to cling to him but couldn't? For the Abraham family to be favored by Roland, even if they didn't soar to success in the future, they would at least be safe and stable. This way, even if something unexpected happens to me in the future, they at least won't decline again, Bethel silently added in his heart. He believed that even if he died in the future, Roland would still be alive and well. Roland was naturally very satisfied with Bethel's answer. He then thought of something else and asked, "Then Bethel, do you want to go home and take a look now?" Bethel was silent for a second, then nodded and said, "I should indeed go home and take a look." As he said this, Bethel's expression became somewhat dazed. He had been away from home for too long, so long that he once thought he would never have the chance to return to his homeland. He never expected that in this life, he would truly have the day of returning home. Chapter 357 Mr. Door returns to Abraham. Bethel took a deep breath. He suddenly looked at Roland, and said seriously and solemnly, "Thank you, Lucifer. Why are you suddenly so polite?" Roland glanced at Bethel with a slight surprise, then he also smiled and said, "But I accept your thanks, I deserve it." Bethel's expression remained serious. He continued to Roland, speaking slowly but with immense solemnity, "Lucifer, as long as you don't destroy this world, I will help you for one day." "Hey!" Roland couldn't help but chuckle when he heard this. He looked at Bethel and said, "Then you'll be working for me for the rest of your life." "My pleasure." Bethel also smiled. As he spoke, he bowed, a very ancient ritual from the fourth epoch, a gesture of allegiance from an angel to a deity. When Mr. Door once performed this ritual to Tudor, he was careless and showed little respect, but the current Bethel's movements were extremely serious. This was not because Roland was more powerful than the Blood Emperor, but because Roland had proven through his actions since his transmigration that he was a more worthy object of allegiance than the Blood Emperor. Since Bethel was going home to visit, there was naturally nothing for Amon and Antigonus to do. Roland sent both of them back to work with Saussure. Roland himself chose to accompany Bethel home. After all, in Roland's eyes, the current Abraham was his vegetable garden, and he always had to check the quality of the young cabbages and pick out the best seedlings. Of course, Roland did not deny that he also truly wanted to watch the show, to see how the Abrahams would react to their suddenly appearing ancestor. Facts proved that he didn't know how the young cabbages reacted, but the old cabbage almost passed out. Calm down, deep breaths, yes, just like that. Roland looked at Dorian, who was overly excited by the sudden appearance of his ancestor and almost lost control on the spot. He shook his head, skillfully casting abilities to forcibly calm the other's emotions, while looking at the somewhat bewildered Bethel beside him, and said, "Good thing I followed along, otherwise this would have been a huge mess." Bethel's expression at this moment was a mixture of emotions. He clearly hadn't expected his descendant to be so excited as to nearly lose control at first sight. His entire face was filled with the helplessness of, what the hell is going on? I know they'd be excited by my return, but why this excited? This was due to Bethel's insufficient understanding of the current Abraham in this era. Although he had learned about the current state of the Abraham family through some channels after regaining consciousness, he obviously had not deeply realized what the return of him, an ancestor, truly meant to the current members of the Abraham family. After all, when Mr. Door had not yet been sealed, the Abrahams, though somewhat excited upon seeing Mr. Door, were generally within a normal range, not to this extent. Ancestor. Are you Ancestor Bethel? Dorian, who was forcibly brought back by Roland, maintained an expression of disbelief even though his excited emotions were forcibly calmed, only his tone became tranquil, making this scene appear somewhat comically misplaced. I am Bethel Abraham, and I have returned. Bethel had also adjusted his mood at this moment, nodding slightly and saying. Dorian felt that he should have been crying at this moment. After so many years of decline, their Abraham family finally welcomed the return of their ancestor, but because his emotions were forcibly calmed, he couldn't cry at all and could only say calmly, "You have finally returned, ancestor." How strange, it feels like there's no atmosphere at all. Roland couldn't help but comment. It would have been fine if he hadn't said anything, but once he did, the atmosphere became even stranger. Dorian also noticed the man who appeared with his ancestor at this time. He deliberated for a moment and said, "Ah, Your Excellency, I feel that I am now able to control my emotions. Could I ask you to remove the extraordinary ability you have imposed on me?" "Are you sure?" Roland looked at him with a smile and said, "Next time, I may not be able to control your emotions in time. And the result of not being able to control them would naturally be loss of control." "I'm sure, I'm already prepared." Dorian nodded. He had indeed been overly excited just now from seeing his ancestor, but that was also because he was unprepared. Now that he had psychological preparation, although Dorian's sequence was not high, he was still an Abraham who had experienced many trials and tribulations, so he naturally had confidence in being able to control his emotions. "All right then." Roland nodded indifferently, lifting the control over Dorian's emotions. Then he seemed to remember something, and looked at Bethel with a strange expression, saying, "Wait, why does he look like he completely didn't anticipate your return? You haven't contacted them during this time, have you?" Bethel's expression immediately became a bit awkward. He lightly coughed and said, "I wasn't sure if I could truly return at first, and I was afraid that if they knew of my existence, they might become conceited and invite disaster, so I didn't inform them. Later, I thought that a day or two wouldn't make a difference, and it would be the same to inform them upon my true return." Hearing this, Roland raised an eyebrow, not too surprised. Although many things had happened during this period, it had actually been less than half a year since Mr. Door encountered him. It was normal for Mr. Door not to rush to inform Abraham, because to be honest, given Abraham's situation, if they really knew that Mr. Door was about to return, they might very well seek death. Many Abrahams were peace-loving, but there were also those who were discontent with the status quo and eager to seek death. Otherwise, in the original work, even with Mr. Fool's protection, why would a member of the Abraham family insist on releasing Mr. Door? Although the eavesdropping Dorian did not know the full story, he could guess from their conversation that although Mr. Door had just returned, he might have been able to contact them before, but did not do so, and before that, Mr. Door was probably sealed somewhere, and perhaps only recently showed signs of being unsealed. Dorian had no complaints about this, but he thought of the full moon whispers that had suddenly stopped appearing a few months ago, and couldn't help but wonder if the disappearance of the full moon curse was related to this. "What is your name?" Bethel did not continue chatting with Roland. His gaze returned to Dorian, and he asked with a slightly gentle tone. If former members of the Abraham family saw this, they would certainly be greatly astonished. After all, the former Mr. Dorr was mostly serious when facing his clansmen, possessing the dignity of the family head, and rarely showed such a gentle demeanor. One can only say that time has truly changed many things, both for Abraham and for Bethel himself. Chapter 358 Time changes many things. Reporting to Ancestor, my current name is Dorian Gray. Dorian naturally didn't dare to hide anything and quickly replied, then carefully explained, please forgive me for concealing the Abraham surname from the outside. You might not know, but since your disappearance, many things have happened to the family. The Abraham of today is no longer the Abraham of the past. As he said this, Dorian's expression was both sorrowful and cautiously observing Mr. Dorr's expression. Although he had always anticipated his ancestor's return, Dorian's understanding of Bethel was limited to the records in the family's ancient texts. But as is well known, all records inevitably have distortions, so Dorian truly couldn't gauge his ancestor's temperament or his attitude towards the current Abraham. I know of Abraham's current decline. There's no need to be so cautious, I know this isn't your fault. Bethel sighed, and he said, but I truly don't understand the specific details. So, Dorian, please tell me. Tell me what has happened all these years, and tell me about the current state of Abraham. Hearing Bethel's words, Dorian couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He then organized his thoughts and began to slowly introduce Mr. Dorr to the events of these past years. The story naturally began with Mr. Dorr's disappearance. Mr. Dorr's disappearance not only meant the Abraham family lost its greatest backing but also marked the beginning of the Abraham family's misfortunes. In that war, the Abraham family lost all of its angels, and its high sequences were severely wounded. Coupled with the Tudor Empire's defeat, this forced the Abraham family to relocate en masse to escape the pursuit of the victors of the Four Emperors' War, including the Seven Deities. However, the pursuit itself wasn't the reason for the Abraham family's decline. In fact, perhaps out of respect for Mr. Dorr, the Seven Deities' pursuit of the Abraham family back then was very perfunctory. Compared to the Tudor imperial family, which was almost wiped out, although the Abraham family had few high sequences left due to various reasons, their remaining vital forces were well preserved. The true reason for the Abraham family's decline was the existence of the full moon whispers. The full moon whispers prevented the entire Abraham family from producing new high sequences, and even mid-sequences became a rarity, fundamentally preventing the Abraham family from rising again. Of course, facing this situation, Abraham was not without solutions. For example, a few decades ago, they tried a method, recruiting students who were not of Abraham family bloodline to avoid the troubles of the full moon whispers. However, tragically, the people of the Abraham family truly had poor judgment. They finally managed to cultivate a few good prospects, only for those individuals to turn around and betray Abraham, happily joining the Aurora Order and even advancing to demigod. As a result, Abraham was once again severely hit, and the already declining family became even more so. Fortunately, a few months ago, the full moon whispers suddenly disappeared for some unknown reason. Because of this, I contacted other members of the family, hoping to select suitable children from within the family to cultivate again. Dorian paused here, his expression showing a hint of disappointment and frustration. It's a pity that many people are afraid. They don't believe that the full moon whispers have truly disappeared completely. They worry that it's only temporary, fearing that they will encounter the full moon whispers again after becoming beyonders, and refuse to let their children become beyonders. At the end, Dorian looked at Bethel with a face full of guilt and said, Ancestor, we have failed the Abraham surname, we have failed the glory you once brought. Many clansmen have lost the honor of being an Abraham, but please forgive them. Dorian had not finished speaking when he heard a sigh, which made him stop involuntarily, awaiting his ancestor's judgment. This is not your fault, nor is it theirs. Bethel sighed. If it were him 1,000 years ago, he would likely have been angry, would have expelled these cowards, feeling they were unworthy of being an Abraham. But 1,000 years had passed, and Bethel was no longer that strict patriarch. He understood even more clearly that the reason for the Abraham family's decline lay with him, so he had no intention of blaming these Abrahams. But Bethel knew even more clearly what a qualified patriarch should do, especially in this special period. So he suppressed all his sighs, his expression becoming serious and solemn, and he said, "Spread the news of my return to all Abrahams. I want to rebuild the family. If there are those unwilling to return, I will not force them. They can live their lives as ordinary people, and I permit them to continue using the Abraham surname. But if they choose to return, from now on, they must obey my commands. In addition, I will select a group of suitable clansmen for cultivation. If you have suitable candidates, you can also recommend them to me, not limited to the Abraham family bloodline." "Yes, ancestor." Dorian's expression was half excited, half relieved. He then seemed to think of something, hesitated for a second, and then spoke. "Ancestor, I have a suitable candidate. She has great potential and a very good personality. She is my student. I have divined that her joining would be a good thing for Abraham." Roland's expression beside him changed for a second. If he remembered correctly, Furzwall seemed to have made contact with a member of the Abraham family some time ago. Had she, as the original text described, become Dorian's student? Roland truly wasn't clear about this, as he had promised Mr. Dor not to privately contact the Abraham family, and he had been very busy during this time. Besides urging for updates, he didn't have much time to concern himself with what Furz was doing. "You know his student." Bethel naturally couldn't help but notice the change in Roland's expression and asked with a slight surprise. "If his student is Furzwall, then I do know her," Roland said with a smile. "My student is her fan." Speaking of this, Roland paused, looked at Bethel, and continued, "Besides that, in the original fate, she is considered your successor, though you never met. No problem there. As the future angel of the Abraham family, Furz inherited Bethel's characteristics, so she was indeed a successor." At these words, Bethel was clearly intrigued and asked, "What kind of person is she?" "A salted fish." Roland chuckled and said, "A not-so-reliable fellow, but very potential, and with good character. Without guidance, she might grow wildly, but if properly disciplined, she should be able to become a good angel." Roland's words were truthful. First, Furz's ability to become an angel in just over a decade in the future spoke volumes about her talent. In terms of character, she was at least grateful and had no major moral issues. She might be a bit petty, but just as a mischievous child like Amon could be straightened out, Furz's minor flaws wouldn't be a big problem to correct. Especially with Bethel's return now, as long as Furz could be an obedient tool angel, nothing else really mattered. Roland was not such a demanding person, he didn't require everyone around him to be a saint. Chapter 359, Furz is slacking off. "That sounds like a good kid," Bethel mused. "Not everyone could become an angel. In fact, let alone an angel, there were countless Beyonders stuck at Sequence 5, unable to become a demigod their entire lives." While the scarcity of demigod potions was certainly a factor, it was also related to the limited number of people with the talent to become demigods. For example, the reason Disease Admiral was favored by her mother was precisely because she possessed the talent to become a demigod. If demigods were like this, then angels were even more so. This was not a sequence that could be achieved simply by having resources. The requirements to become an angel were extremely stringent. Without the necessary talent, even completing the ritual and consuming the potion would most likely lead to losing control. Even if one didn't lose control and miraculously succeeded, there could still be the tragedy of an ancient god's will resurrecting within the body later on. For instance, a certain Antigonus was like this, accommodating a uniqueness but lacking the ability to suppress the celestial worthy's will, and the result was, well, everyone knows. It could be said that the power system of the Lord of Mysteries world truly emphasized the concept of virtue matching position. Anyone whose virtue did not match their position would basically end up either losing control or dying. Precisely because of this, someone capable of becoming an angel could truly be said to be very talented. Especially since Roland had personally affirmed that the other party had good character, which at least proved that the other party was not the kind of ungrateful, heartless person. They might have some minor flaws, but there were absolutely no major issues concerning right and wrong. This was enough for Bethel. After all, having lived in the fourth epoch, he had seen too many eccentric angels. Putting everything else aside, Bethel could even tolerate a scoundrel like Abraham, and even hold his nose and work for a madman like the Blood Emperor. What was a student with a few minor flaws? Just as Roland said, at worst, he could just straighten her out. Dorian, who was listening in, finally couldn't help but ask at this moment, "Ancestor, and this esteemed sir, are you talking about my student?" His tone was inevitably a little incredulous. After all, Dorian was not stupid, he could hear what the two of them meant by their words. "That's right." Roland nodded with a smile, then looked at Bethel and hinted, "It seems you're tempted, Bethel." Cough. "I want to see her." Bethel neither admitted nor denied, just coughed lightly and said. Although he trusted Roland's words, Bethel still felt it was best to meet Ms. Furs first before making a decision. If she was truly a good person, then he should indeed take on a student. Furs is currently in Backland, the address should be. Dorian quickly spoke, genuinely happy for his student, seeing this as a tremendous opportunity. "I'll go see her, you can contact the other Abrahams." Bethel nodded, gave Dorian a few more instructions, then looked at Roland and asked, "Shall we go?" Go. I'm also curious about how her new book is coming along. I hope it's not still at the same progress as when Jack last came to urge her." Roland smiled and said. Furs was slacking off. But she swore, she didn't intend to slack off, it was just that these sea legends were too captivating. As Furs read, she couldn't help but imagine a new story, which led to her reading materials at an incredibly slow pace. As for putting the new story down on paper, how could that be possible? She had already enjoyed herself while imagining it, why would she need to write it down? Actually, this isn't slacking off, it should be called accumulating inspiration. Yes, that's right. Furs found excuses for her slacking behavior, muttering to herself. After speaking, she couldn't help but look around nervously, fearing that a certain Mr. Jack might suddenly appear and demand an update. To be fair, Furs had a love-hate relationship with taking Jack's commission to write a custom book. She loved that he paid really well, much more than she usually earned from writing, but she hated that Jack would actually come to her door to urge her. Heaven knew how bewildered she was the first time she was urged at her door. But what could Furs do? After all, she couldn't beat him, and he really paid too much. Speaking of new books, for this, Bounty Hunter, 1, besides the Pirate Queen as the female lead, I can actually arrange some confidants for the male lead. For example, these few pirate generals are very good, I can design a few female supporting characters based on them. Furs's gaze fell on several newspapers reporting the deeds of pirate generals nearby, and her thoughts couldn't help but wander, with inspirations popping up one after another. She then looked at another custom book next to it, which only had a few lines of outline besides the title, and showed a troubled expression. Should Clara's lover be a poet or a noble? I feel like both are very suitable. After thinking for a while and still unable to decide on the lover, Furs shook her head, deciding not to think about this problem for now and to naturally finalize the choice when she officially started writing later. Just as Furs's brain had been working for a while and she was about to continue slacking off, she suddenly heard a slightly playful voice. "Are you slacking off, Ms. Furs?" This voice made Furs jolt. Almost instinctively, one hand gripped the pen beside her, while the other pulled out a notebook buried under a pile of materials, ready to rush her manuscript. She couldn't be blamed for her reaction, because she recognized the owner of the voice. It was Jack's teacher, His Highness Lucifer, the angel who saved City of Silver. "Why are you so nervous?" Roland raised an eyebrow, looking at Furs's startled reaction, and said mercilessly, "You haven't written a single word during this time, have you?" Furs was sweating profusely. She mustered up the courage to look to her side and, sure enough, saw a familiar figure, but beside him was a stranger she didn't recognize. "Who is this?" Furs was a bit confused, but she didn't have the time to think about which big shot the other party was. She could only smile awkwardly at Roland and say, "It's not like I haven't written a single word." "So how many words have you written?" Roland smiled at her. Under his gaze, Furs's demeanor grew weaker and weaker, her voice becoming softer and softer. She said in a voice like a mosquito, 300 words. "If I'm not mistaken, it's been 3 days since Jack last came here to rush your manuscript, and you still have a week until your next deadline. Roland continued to smile at Furs, seemingly not angry, but said unhurriedly, are you planning to write 30,000 words in the last day? I'm sorry, I was wrong, I shouldn't slack off, I'll go rush the manuscript right now. Furs immediately knelt down, she was truly quite afraid of him. Although she knew rationally that he was definitely not an angel who would randomly kill innocents, emotionally, Furs was instinctively scared of such a big shot. Chapter 360 Furs's Choice. Roland wasn't surprised by Furs's immediate prostration, not even hesitating for a second, he just shook his head with a slight smile. Sometimes, he truly found Furs interesting. If you called her cowardly, she could genuinely delay a manuscript until the very last day, actively admitting her mistakes but refusing to change, yet if you called her brave, she wouldn't hesitate for a second to prostrate herself. Isn't this a kind of reckless cowardly duality? One could say it even had the Go-3 family's characteristics. Roland thought idly, then spoke, there's no rush for the manuscript. I came to see you this time mainly for another matter. Hearing this, Furs paused, her expression somewhat puzzled. She cautiously looked at Roland and asked, Your Highness Lucifer, what can I do for you? Roland smiled and gestured to Bethel beside him, saying, This is Bethel Abraham, also known as Mr. Door, whom you are familiar with. He has now returned and plans to reorganize the Abraham family. He intends to cultivate some Beyonders of the Door pathway, and Dorian has recommended you to him. Furs froze, then her eyes widened as she looked at Bethel beside her, saying in disbelief, You are Mr. Door. It is I, Bethel nodded, revealing a somewhat gentle smile. So, the full moon whispers suddenly disappeared because you were freed and no longer needed help. Furs blurted out. She wasn't aware of the inner workings of Mr. Door's plea for help, only knowing some things about Mr. Door from Mr. Fool, and had thought the full moon whispers were genuinely Mr. Door asking for help. The next second after blurting it out, Furs realized her mistake, belatedly covering her mouth with her hand, her expression full of regret. After all, no one likes to have their shortcomings exposed, and her words just now had the suspicion of doing just that. Oh, her loose tongue. Bethel evidently hadn't expected Furs to say such a thing and paused slightly, but he wasn't angry. Instead, he smiled and said, Yes, I'm back, so I don't need to ask for help anymore. As for the truth that he wasn't actually asking for help, but rather telling people not to save him, considering Furs was only a low to mid-sequence Beyander and couldn't know about outer gods, Bethel didn't intend to explain. It's good that you're back, it's good, Furs gave an awkward smile. She then thought of something and quickly changed the subject, saying, Mr. Door, so you want to cultivate me because of my teacher's recommendation. As she spoke, Furs couldn't help but feel incredible. After all, she knew herself well, perhaps she wasn't terrible, but compared to other excellent Beyonders like Mr. World or Mr. Emperor, she was truly far behind. Someone like her, actually able to be cultivated by an angel. Is it real or fake? Furs felt like she had encountered a pie falling from the sky, finding it hard to believe while also worrying if there was some hidden agenda. I do have that intention. More accurately, I plan to take you as my student, Bethel nodded, looking at the wide-eyed Furs before him with a gentle smile. This even larger pie clearly dizzied Furs all at once. It took her several seconds to recover, and she blurted out, But I already have a teacher. The next second, Furs's brain re-engaged, and she quickly added, Of course, I didn't mean to say you're not good, it's just that I really do have a teacher, and I don't know how Teacher Dorian recommended me to you, but I know myself, I'm not outstanding, just a very ordinary Beyander, and might not be worthy of being your student. Of course, Teacher Dorian certainly didn't deliberately exaggerate my abilities to you. Furs certainly knew what a great thing it was to become a student of an angel, but first, she wasn't an ungrateful person. Dorian had been very good to her, and Furs couldn't bring herself to abandon Dorian as a teacher for better resources. Secondly, Furs had self-awareness, she didn't think she had the qualifications to become a student of an angel. Bethel listened quietly to Furs's words. He looked at the girl before him, who was clearly very nervous and even speaking a bit incaustically, his expression devoid of any annoyance at being rejected. He just smiled and said, It seems Lucifer's evaluation of you is not wrong. Ah. Furs was clearly a bit confused. Lucifer said you were a very good child. Although you have some minor flaws and are not entirely reliable, your character is excellent, you are very talented, and you can become a very good angel in the future, Bethel said with a smile. Furs was clearly even more confused. She looked at Bethel, then at Roland, who was watching the show, and pointed at herself in disbelief, saying, "Me? An angel?" To be honest, Furs didn't even know she had such potential, and all those compliments earlier. Furs felt overwhelmed for a moment. "Don't look at me like that, I'm just telling the truth," Roland smiled, speaking unhurriedly. "Of course, if you could stop delaying manuscripts, my evaluation of you could be even higher." Furs, who had just been feeling a mix of embarrassment and a little smugness from being praised, instantly froze, then awkwardly started looking at the ceiling. "This ceiling is truly a ceiling. No hope, bury her." Roland shook his head at her reaction, saying seriously, "Don't bury me, don't bury me. I can still be saved." Furs immediately stopped looking at the ceiling and quickly said, if it were anyone else saying this, Furs would definitely think he was joking, but His Highness Lucifer, haha, hard to say. At any rate, Furs didn't really want to personally test whether what he said was a joke or not. "Don't be afraid, Lucifer was just joking." Bethel shook his head upon seeing this, comforting her. Furs instantly breathed a sigh of relief. Bethel then continued, "Furs, if you are unwilling to be my student, I will not force you, but you are indeed a very talented person, and I do not wish to waste your talent. Therefore, I hope you can follow me to study afterward. Don't worry, you don't have to call me teacher, and you won't be the only one studying with me. Other promising Abraham members will also study with you," Bethel said, looking at Furs. "Of course, this is not mandatory, you can refuse." "That's what you say, but you've said so much, how can I refuse now?" Furs ran a hand through her hair. She wasn't an ungrateful person. Since Bethel had said so much, there was no way she could remain unmoved. So Furs nodded and said, "Thank you, Mr. Dorr, I am willing to follow you and study." Chapter 361 Furs can't be a salted fish anymore. Chapter 361 Furs can't be a salted fish anymore. Bethel smiled upon hearing this, then chatted with Furs for a few more moments, mainly to understand her current sequence and her grasp of Beander knowledge, while also answering some questions that had troubled Furs for a long time. After understanding Furs' general situation, Bethel gave Furs a few more instructions, finally saying, "I'll come pick you up in a few days. At that time, you'll go with others to the Abraham family's main residence to begin your studies. Your foundation in mysticism is very poor, so you need to catch up properly." Upon hearing this, Furs' face instantly flushed, not for any other reason, but purely out of embarrassment. After all, no matter how gentle Bethel's words were, they couldn't hide the fact that he was essentially calling her a bad student. There was nothing she could do. Furs had only been a Beander for a few years, and for most of that time, she had been a wild Beander, only recently acquiring a teacher. Even so, due to the terrible situation of the Abraham family, Dorian had no way to let Furs systematically study Beander knowledge. It could only be said that important parts were taught, and Furs was encouraged to self-study, but it was clearly impossible to expect Furs to have a deep mastery of various mystical knowledge under such circumstances. At least in front of Mr. Dorr, Furs' meager foundation in mysticism was truly no different from that of a bad student, making Mr. Dorr instinctively want to give her systematic remedial lessons. "I will definitely study hard and will never let down your cultivation," Furs said earnestly, suppressing her embarrassment. Her words were sincere. Although Furs was a salted fish, she wasn't someone who would let an opportunity slip by. Otherwise, how could she have become an angel in the original work? I believe you," Bethel nodded and said. Roland, at this moment, suddenly interjected, "Very ambitious, good. I hope you can give such an ambitious answer on the submission deadline a week from now." Furs was stunned. At that moment, she suddenly realized something, feeling as if struck by lightning. Wait, so even if she went to catch up on mystical knowledge, she still had to meet deadlines? Otherwise, Roland asked, smiling as he looked at her. Furs' momentum instantly dwindled. She almost subconsciously looked at Mr. Dorr beside her. "I'm sorry, Furs, I'm afraid I can't help you with this." Bethel showed her a slightly apologetic smile. So even Mr. Dorr couldn't contend with the great demon King Lucifer. Furs felt her vision darken. She could almost see her bleak future. It's fine, isn't it, just studying mystical knowledge while rushing deadlines? I believe you can do it. Roland even patted her shoulder in a feigned manner at this moment, saying, I don't think I can. I can't do it. Fur's words caught in her throat, and she didn't dare to actually say them for a long time. In the end, she could only say in a voice as faint as a mosquito's buzz, can I apply for a deadline extension? Sorry, no. Roland shook his head with a gentle smile. Fur's completely collapsed. At this moment, she didn't care about her demeanor, lying on the table like a dead fish, muttering quietly things like, I'm going to die, how can I possibly manage all this? I want to be a salted fish, ah. Lucifer, Bethel, watching from the side, looked as if he wanted to speak but hesitated, then finally couldn't help but open his mouth. You can exempt her from her mystical studies, Roland said, smiling as he looked at him. Bethel immediately fell silent. Frankly speaking, he was quite satisfied with Furs. Although she refused to be his student, this point actually made Mr. Door even more satisfied. Someone who, when faced with such a great temptation, is unwilling to abandon their teacher, is truly a reliable person, and only such a person can genuinely become the backbone of the Abraham family in the future, and even become its pillar after he encounters an accident. As for the so-called teacher-student relationship, Bethel truly didn't care about it. Precisely because of this, Bethel found it even more unacceptable for Furs to have shortcomings in mystical knowledge. After all, in this world, it's fine if one doesn't get involved in the mystical domain, but once one does, the amount of knowledge reserved can often truly determine a person's life or death. In other worlds, knowledge as power might be a metaphor. In this world, knowledge as power can truly be manifested in combat and dangerous situations. So, remedial lessons were definitely necessary. Bethel could only look at Furs with a slight apology, saying, I'm very sorry, child, I will prepare potions to restore your energy. If you make full use of the night, balancing both aspects won't be too difficult. The voice was gentle, but the content was devilish. Thank you, Mr. Door. What else could Furs say? She could only smile and thank him, but her eyes were completely dead. She had a premonition that she, Furs Wall, the salted fish among salted fish, the king of procrastination, the master of delay, a severe chronic lazybones, would from now on probably bid farewell to her salted fish life and become a roll king, who worked desperately 24 hours a day. Is this the price of being favored by an angel? Furs was on the verge of tears, feeling that Emperor Rosal's famous quote was indeed true, there really was no free lunch in this world. All right, let her quietly accept reality. We shouldn't disturb her anymore, Roland said, shaking his head as he looked at Furs' disheartened expression. Bethel did not object. He merely pondered for half a second, then snapped his fingers. Snap. Furs was momentarily stunned, then looked in surprise as a small box appeared before her, floating about half an arm's length away from her. I almost forgot, this is my welcoming gift to you, Bethel said with a smile. This, you're too kind. Furs looked at the small box before her with a bit of bewilderment, completely not expecting this turn of events. As an elder, isn't it normal to give gifts to a junior? Bethel smiled. Of course, he wouldn't casually give welcoming gifts to just any junior, but Furs genuinely pleased him, and with a touch of guilt, this gift came about. Bethel then said, aren't you going to open it and see? Upon hearing this, Furs quickly reached out and grabbed the box. Then, she carefully opened the small box, and lying inside was a very beautiful necklace. The necklace had a platinum base, inlaid with several perfectly colored gemstones, making it almost impossible for Furs to take her eyes off it at first glance. This is too beautiful. Each gemstone on this necklace has a special function, Bethel explained at this moment. The welcoming gift he gave to a favored student naturally couldn't be a mere decorative item, but rather a Beyonder item that combined escape, defense, and offense, similar to an upgraded version of the stone necklace Furs had once used, but more durable and not a purely single-use item. Chapter 362 Bethel is working. This made Furs, who was already captivated by the necklace's beauty, feel as if the necklace in her hand weighed 1,000 pounds. She looked up, slightly flustered, and though reluctant, she said, this is truly too valuable, Mr. Door, I cannot accept it. There's no reason for me to take back a gift I've given. If you don't like it, you can throw it away, Bethel said, shaking his head. How could she possibly throw it away? Furs couldn't help but inwardly complain, still feeling a bit flustered. Mainly, this item was indeed too valuable for her. Roland then said, "Take it, Furs. Just consider it compensation for your mental distress. After all, for a while, you won't have any time to rest." At this point, Roland paused, then spoke with a pleasant smile, "How about some exercises that can bury you?" Upon hearing this, Furs instinctively activated her imagination, instantly picturing herself buried under mountains of study materials and exercises. Suddenly, the necklace in her hand didn't feel so valuable anymore. What chilled her even more was that Mr. Door across from her did not refute Lucifer's words. So, are there really exercises that can bury her? Furs took a deep breath, then, facing Bethel's slightly encouraging smile, she no longer declined. Instead, she put on the necklace right then and there, while also thanking him. "Thank you, Mr. Door." "You're welcome," Bethel smiled contentedly, and indeed didn't bother to explain about the exercises. After all, given Furs's weak foundation, that statement was actually not wrong. After giving Furs the welcoming gift, Bethel and Roland didn't stay long either, and then directly bid farewell and left. After they left, Furs lowered her head, feeling the necklace on her neck, then immediately slammed her head onto the desk. "Ouch, ouch, ouch." Hiss, it really wasn't a dream. Furs sat up again, clutching her head, tears almost coming out from the pain. She then rubbed her head while looking at the crimson full moon outside the window, her expression sorrowful. "It's over, I can never be a slacker again. ... It seems you are very satisfied with her." After leaving Furs's house, Roland glanced at Bethel, who was clearly in a good mood, and spoke with a smile. "You should trust your judgment." Bethel did not deny it, nodding and saying, "She is indeed a very good child." "Of course. When has my judgment ever been wrong?" Roland nodded without any embarrassment, then thought of something and said, "But where is the Abraham family's main residence now?" "To be honest, I don't know where the Abraham family's main residence is now. It's probably not in a place I'm familiar with," Bethel said, smiling at this point and looking at Roland, "but in the future, they will have a new main residence." "Wow." Roland raised his eyebrows, not surprised. Then the two returned to Dorian's residence, where he was writing furiously, likely composing letters to others. "Ancestor, you're back." Dorian looked up, stopped his frantic writing, and looked at Bethel with a slight unease. His unease wasn't because of anything else, it was mainly his concern for Furs. After all, although Dorian had an 18-layer filter for his student and had overheard Bethel and Roland's conversation, knowing that his student seemed to have a very promising future, Dorian was also aware of Furs's somewhat lazy personality, so he worried that his student might anger his ancestor. Then Dorian heard his ancestor say, "Furs refused to be my student." Dorian. "Furs, what are you doing, Furs?" "Ancestor, please forgive." Dorian almost instinctively began to plead for his student. But Bethel interrupted him, smiling and saying, "Don't you want to ask why she refused?" "Why?" Dorian's plea was stifled, and he could only ask, following Bethel's lead. "Because she already has you as her teacher." Bethel didn't play coy, stating simply and clearly. Dorian was stunned for a moment, doubting if he had misheard. After confirming he hadn't, Dorian's feelings were a mix of emotions. On one hand, he was angry that Furs didn't seize the opportunity. On the other hand, he was touched by Furs's choice and felt he hadn't taken the wrong student. Besides this, Dorian's mood also carried a hint of trepidation, which made him cautiously look at his ancestor. "Don't worry, I'm not angry about it. On the contrary, I'm very happy." Bethel clearly didn't intend to tease Dorian any further, and said gently, "Talent is certainly worth valuing, but character, in my opinion, is the most important." Furs's choice was very good. Dorian breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing this, yet still felt a little regretful. He truly hoped that Furs could become Bethel's student and gain better opportunities. Bethel naturally saw what he was thinking, which made him smile, then said, "Although Furs will not become my student, I still appreciate her. Afterwards, she will study with me, along with other excellent Abraham family members." Upon hearing this, Dorian was completely relieved, though still somewhat regretful. After all, there's definitely a difference in treatment between being the only student and a promising junior who is highly regarded and cultivated. But Dorian couldn't possibly blame Furs for this, and could only sigh inwardly. For the next period, Bethel was very busy. He first finalized the new address for the Abraham family's main residence, then transferred the remaining sealed artifacts of the Abraham family to the new main residence, and dealt with some of those with more severe negative effects, meaning, those that could be broken were shattered into Beander characteristics, and those that couldn't be broken were resealed. Next, Bethel sorted through the ancient books passed down by the Abraham family, removing the fabricated parts, then categorized and stored the remaining ancient books. He also compiled a systematic set of mysticism textbooks, from beginners to experienced practitioners, ensuring that future Abraham members would have a comprehensive learning process. In addition, Bethel naturally needed to liquidate and manage the various industries, resources, and wealth that the Abraham family currently possessed. This was not a small amount of work. Although the Abraham family had fallen into decline, as the saying goes, a rotten boat still has 3,000 nails. While the Abraham family's wealth in the mysticism field was not as great as before, their financial strength in the secular world was still quite good. The most crucial point was that because the clansmen had long been scattered across the world, their property was also divided haphazardly, which made the Abraham family's situation in this regard a complete mess. And during Bethel's various busy periods, members of the Abraham family arrived at the new main residence one after another. The number of people who chose to respond to Mr. Doerr's call was not small, at least 7 or 8/10 of the entire family members. The remaining portion were those who were determined to live as ordinary people. Chapter 363, The Calamity of the Young Generation of the Abraham Family. Bethel re-registered the Abraham family members who had returned to the main family, with a particular focus on the young generation brought back by the Abrahams. Unlike Dorian, who had recommended furs, perhaps due to the significant psychological trauma caused by someone's previous betrayal, most of the elder Abrahams who returned to the main family did not bring back any young people not of Abraham bloodline. However, some middle-aged Abrahams did bring back students who were not of Abraham bloodline. Bethel chose a time to gather this group of young people, aged 15 to 30, and roughly assessed their aptitudes. Not many were outstanding, most could only be described as average, and a few were even utterly useless. Bethel couldn't help but shake his head. Don't be so strict, Bethel. Most of these children have been living incognito with their parents, so it's normal for them not to stand out. Besides, geniuses are inherently rare, Roland said, comforting Bethel, who seemed a little disappointed. I know, it's just. Sigh. Bethel sighed. He also knew he might have been expecting too much, but there was nothing he could do. After all, the young generation Bethel had encountered in this era included Klein first, then Furs. One became a god in 3 years, the other achieved angelhood in just over a decade. Under such brilliant examples, it was inevitable for him to have some unrealistic illusions. Now, the facts proved that illusions were just illusions, at least, besides Furs, the Abraham family had no such geniuses. However, despite his disappointment, Bethel did not give up on the young generation of the Abraham family. After all, even if their aptitudes were truly ordinary, becoming low-sequence Beyonders was still not an issue. If they learned the acting method well, mid-sequence was not a difficult hurdle either. As for demigods, that was a barrier that most people could not cross, and Bethel did not force it. So very quickly, the young generation of the Abraham family, who were originally excited about the return of their ancestors and even fantasized about the Abraham family regaining its past glory, encountered the harsh reality of knowledge. You're an ordinary person who wants to become a Beander. Sure, but first, learn this pile of mysticism fundamentals, and also learn at least one mystical language. You're already a Beander and want to advance. Have you learned the acting method? How well have you digested the potion? How well do you grasp the abilities of your own pathway, and how much do you understand the abilities of Beyonders from other pathways? How much do you know about various mystical creatures? Can you name the corresponding monster just by description, and how many mystical languages have you mastered? How well do you understand the knowledge of the spirit world? What? You don't know any of this. And you still want to advance. Do you want to become a useless Beander? The young generation of the Abraham family never dreamed that what they would face upon their return would be an overwhelming amount of study materials. From then on, they lived a life where they opened their eyes to textbooks, closed their eyes to exercises, and even when they slept, they had to do a few test papers in their dreams. Many young people who were originally ambitious cried to their elders after a few days of studying, but their elders just smiled, patted their heads, and sent them back. After all, firstly, who dared to defy their ancestors? Secondly, learning mystical knowledge was indeed not a bad thing. At least, as beyonders of the door pathway, they truly needed to learn knowledge. After all, the door pathway was not like the warrior pathway, which only required fighting and killing. Not to mention, even the warrior pathway has a lot of knowledge that needs to be learned. Parents could only comfort their children or students. Many wild beyonders want to learn this knowledge but have nowhere to learn it. You all work hard. The young generation. It's hard to say if the young generation of the Abraham family ever had a moment where they wanted to drag their elders down with them, to drown together in the sea of knowledge. And among these young people in dire straits, Furs was naturally included. In fact, Furs was in even more dire straits than them. The other young people of the Abraham family at least only needed to bury themselves in study, digest potions, and master their own powers. Furs was different, she also had to make time to write. So why on earth did I agree to Jack's commission in the first place? Furs looked up at the scenery outside the window, unable to help but ponder this philosophical question. Probably because he paid too much. A voice suddenly sounded. Furs shivered and looked at the speaker. Sure enough, it was the great demon king Lucifer. She was actually somewhat used to his appearance, as Lucifer had been staying at the Abraham main family during this period. Your Highness Lucifer, why have you come? Furs forced a smile and asked. I imagine you haven't forgotten that today is the submission deadline. Roland said with a chuckle, looking at her. Furs choked. She had indeed forgotten about it. After all, she had been studying so intensely during this time that she had almost lost track of time. Fortunately, since the last time the terrifying Roland came to urge her for drafts, a certain lazy person finally got her act together and had written quite a few drafts during this period. So at this moment, Furs did not cower and said proudly in a low voice, I've finished writing. Please wait a moment, I'll find it for you now. Soon, Furs found a notebook among a pile of exercises and handed it to Roland, while whispering, however, because I've been busy with my studies recently, I haven't had time to print them out yet. For now, I only have the manuscript. Roland took the notebook and immediately began to flip through it. It had to be said that Furs was indeed very skilled. The characters she created were not only vivid, but the story was also very intricate, which made Roland very satisfied. Roland then returned the notebook to Furs and said, I will relay the content of this manuscript to Jack and have him send this batch of manuscript fees to you. I hope you can still provide a satisfactory answer on the next submission deadline. I will try my best. Furs forced another smile. Roland did not continue to make things difficult for her. After all, when the work was done, he was quite easy to talk to. Roland then went to visit Bethel. At that time, Bethel was reading a history book, the content of which described the history of the fifth epoch. While the young generation of the Abraham family was swimming in the sea of knowledge, Bethel himself also used every spare moment to supplement the knowledge he had missed due to being sealed. Is something wrong? Bethel looked up at Roland and asked. Yes. Roland nodded as a matter of course and said, Next, I'm going to discuss the matter of saving little Tuo with Saussure. Do you want to come? Bethel thought for a second before realizing that little Tuo referred to the god of the bound Toltsana. Then he put down the book in his hand, nodded, and said, Give me a few minutes, I'll arrange the children's afternoon lessons. Chapter 364, Little Anne's Diary. When the younger generation of the Abraham family learned that the great demon king Bethel finally had something to go out for and no classes in the afternoon, they were practically overjoyed. But this joy was quickly extinguished by the test papers Bethel handed out before leaving. Looking at the test papers in their hands that they likely wouldn't finish writing even by night, the younger generation of the Abraham family could only grit their teeth and pick up their pens. As soon as Bethel and Roland left the schoolhouse together, they heard a series of wails coming from the room behind them. Clearly, that was the Abraham family, who had gone crazy from studying during this period, having a breakdown. Is it really necessary to be so strict with them? Even Roland, after witnessing the hell of knowledge the Abraham family had gone through during this time, felt a rare pang of conscience. It was truly too tragic for these children. He hadn't studied this hard even when he was in high school. Their foundation is too poor, and they've become overly arrogant because of my return. If I don't properly curb their temperaments, causing trouble isn't a big deal, but the main thing is they're likely to court death. Bethel shook his head and said, then smiled and continued. Don't worry, I don't plan to keep suppressing them like this. I understand the principle of balancing work and rest. Once their temperaments are curbed after a while, I will appropriately reduce their study load. Bethel isn't the type of person who believes in studying until death if you can't learn. If it were the younger generation of the Abraham family back then, he would also assign heavy study tasks, but it wouldn't be this exaggerated. The main reason Bethel is doing this now is because with his return, these juniors of the Abraham family are all incredibly arrogant and inflated beyond measure. If this mindset isn't suppressed, it's very easy for problems to arise. After all, in the realm of mysticism in this world, it's really easy for beginners to court death, especially those who only half understand but think they're amazing. They basically court death every time they try something. And to put it bluntly, the younger generation of the Abraham family is currently in the aforementioned stage. They don't know much, but their mindset is particularly arrogant, and they can easily court death if they're not careful. Bethel saw this point, so he chose to use the ocean of knowledge to suppress their temperaments. This way, it can suppress their arrogance. Secondly, by learning more knowledge, knowing more, and having a sense of awe, they can better avoid courting death. And thirdly, these young generations indeed have weak foundations and need to properly supplement their knowledge. As long as you have a plan. Roland nodded and didn't express too many opinions on this topic. After all, the Abraham family's matters were Bethel's family affairs. And honestly, in Roland's eyes, these younger generations of the Abraham family were like growing Chinese cabbages. Who would dislike the quality of Chinese cabbages getting better? Because they possessed the abilities of the door pathway, it was naturally just a matter of a spatial door for Bethel and Roland to travel from the Abraham family to where Saussure and others were. As the two walked out of the spatial door, just as Roland's feet touched the ground, he heard Antigonus's slightly anxious voice. Give it back. Quickly give it back to me. Roland raised his eyebrows and looked over with a bit of curiosity, only to see Antigonus in human form trying to snatch something from Amon's hand. Judging from the appearance, it seemed to be a notebook. If you want something, snatch it back. Amon's voice sounded from a certain direction. Another Amon appeared, also holding a notebook in his hand. He even opened the notebook, cleared his throat, and began to read. November 25th, Sunny. It's been a long time since I wrote a diary, but starting today, I've decided to resume this habit to commemorate my new life. I never expected that in my lifetime I could actually break free from losing control and regain clarity. The great demon king saved me. He really likes my demon wolf form and treats me as a pet. What a strange fellow. Clearly, I am an king of angels of full pathway, but in his eyes, my abilities seem less useful than being a demon wolf. It's a bit frustrating. Speaking of this, Amon paused, glanced meaningfully at Roland, who had just come through the spatial door and whose expression was entirely that of watching a show, and said with a smile, Tisk, Antigonus, so Lucifer is the great demon king in your eyes. Antigonus was already dumbfounded. He looked at Amon, who was happily reading the diary, and then cautiously looked at the suddenly appearing Roland. His body slowly changed, and in just a few seconds, he transformed back into a majestic demon wolf. Lord, I am guilty. I shouldn't have been disrespectful to Lord in private, the demon wolf said dejectedly. But please believe that I absolutely did not mean to be dissatisfied with you. Roland glanced at him, then smiled and said in a teasing tone, you probably have a lot in common with Furs. He knew that Furs also called him the great demon king in private. As for getting angry, Roland wasn't that petty yet. Furs? Who? Antigonus clearly hadn't heard this name, but although he didn't know who Furs was, Antigonus still understood Roland's attitude and immediately breathed a sigh of relief. The next second, Antigonus glanced at Amon not far away. He didn't know what he did, but that Amon's clone exploded with a bang, and Antigonus's diary finally returned to his own hand. So irritable, little N. You're really a fierce big dog. Amon's voice sounded again. He didn't care at all about the clone that had just exploded. He slowly raised his hand, pushed the monocle on his face, and said seemingly with emotion. That's purely because you're being a jerk. Antigonus wasn't polite to him at all, rolled his eyes, and said grumpily. Hey. Hearing this, Amon laughed. He looked at Antigonus and said unhurriedly, it's not my fault that someone didn't hide their diary properly. After all, since I'm here, as a marauder, I have no reason to leave empty-handed. Antigonus was clearly even angrier, his breathing became heavier. He wasn't a particularly calm character to begin with, and had just experienced the social death event of having his diary read aloud in public. Now he just wanted to fiercely beat up the Amon in front of him. But tragically, Antigonus also clearly knew that he couldn't win. Poor big dog. As if that wasn't enough, while Antigonus was trying to control his anger, Amon even feigned a sigh, looking very disappointed. Antigonus. Grass black-faced grass. He really couldn't hold back anymore. Amon, after so many years, you're still so annoying. Bethel next to him shook his head, finally unable to watch anymore, and said. I thought you knew, I've always been like this. Amon wasn't embarrassed in the slightest. He looked leisurely at Bethel, seemingly not putting the angry Antigonus in his eyes at all, and just said, What, are you going to avenge the poor dog? Chapter 365, The Go-3 Family's Angel War. After all, we're colleagues now, aren't we? Bethel said with uncertainty, then reached out and rubbed Antigonus's fluffy head, commenting, feels good. No wonder Lucifer likes you so much. I'm starting to like you a bit too, little un. Antigonus. Antigonus shook off his hand with a dark expression and said irritably, What are you touching? Don't randomly touch someone else's head if there's nothing wrong. He, Antigonus, also had dignity. It was one thing for Lucifer the archdemon to treat him like a pet, but although Mr. Door was stronger than him, he wasn't strong enough for Antigonus to willingly become a pet. Bethel could see what Antigonus was thinking and shook his head with a slight chuckle. Then, instead of continuing to look at Amon, he turned to Roland, who was enjoying the show, and said, Is it okay? His question was abrupt, but Roland immediately understood what Bethel meant. He nodded and said, Go ahead, Bethel. Give that arrogant brat a little taste of Mr. Door's shock. Bethel then looked at Amon and said, It's not very convenient here. Shall we go somewhere else? Okay. Amon raised his hand and pushed the monocle on his face, nodding without any hesitation. Then he glanced at Antigonus again and said, Do you want to come? If you're not afraid of being beaten to death, then go ahead, Antigonus said, raising his head without any hint of fear. Only after saying that did he remember something and belatedly looked at Roland, seeking his opinion. Go. Besides fighting Amon, you can also spar with Bethel. Neither of you has had a proper fight in a long time. It's not a bad thing to practice with each other, Roland said, reaching out and patting Antigonus's head with a smile. He could, of course, see that Mr. Door's action was not only to avenge his colleague Antigonus but also to practice. After all, he hadn't had a proper fight with an opponent of the same level in a very long time, and Amon was undoubtedly a good candidate for practice. The three King of Angels of the Go-3 family thus went off to fight, while Roland remained where he was, looking with some curiosity at Saussure, who was reading a document. Aren't you going to join the fun? Saussure put down the document and looked at him with some surprise. As far as he knew, Roland was the one who liked to join the fun the most. If I go, they won't be able to let loose, and pure fighting isn't that interesting to watch anyway, Roland explained with a smile, then added, but you've taken over the matter of the reform so quickly. That's right, the document Saussure had just been handling was related to the border city. Most of the matters here have been dealt with. It just so happens that little K is a bit busy over there, so I helped him handle some things along the way, Saussure said, rubbing his temples. From the slightly tired expression, it was clear that he hadn't rested for a long time. As for why Saussure had a connection with little K, it wasn't that strange. Besides being responsible for the matters of City of Silver and Moon City, Saussure was originally supposed to take over the matters of the border city later. Not to mention, he was still drafting the rules to be implemented later and was even already responsible for the initial rule publicity work in the pilot areas. As expected of you, Roland gave Saussure a thumbs up, slightly clicking his tongue. He had seen employees who slacked off, but he had never seen someone like Saussure who actively sought work for himself. Why don't you rest for a bit? Otherwise, I'm really afraid that the dignified Dark Angel will die suddenly here with me. Roland even felt a rare pang of conscience because of this and sincerely suggested. Don't worry, I can still hold on. There are still many things to deal with. Saussure shook his head, his gaze gentle but firm as he refused. When I need to rest, I will rest. All right, if you insist. Roland shook his head. Faced with such an employee, he couldn't persuade him much, so he brought up another topic and said. Regarding the publicity work for the initial rules, you've done very well. I can feel that we are very close to the rules being established. In about 1 or 2 days, the 2 initial rules we drafted can officially appear in the pilot areas. It was not easy for rules covering a city to take effect. The main reason was that at this stage, only a few border cities could conduct publicity work. Even though most people already believed in the existence of the rules, the number of people was still insufficient. But there was nothing that could be done about this. After all, the requirements for the rules to take effect were relatively high at this stage, and it was not convenient for Saussure to conduct publicity in cities that had not yet been taken over. It was naturally not easy for the rules to take effect. However, later, when the reform officially begins and all countries are taken over, things will surely become much simpler. This is also thanks to that child Antigonus. He has been working very hard and conscientiously during this time. Saussure couldn't help but smile when he heard Roland's words. Then, as if remembering something, he praised Antigonus, who had been assisting him with the initial rule publicity during this time. Saussure was truly very satisfied with Antigonus. The main reason was that the demonic wolf had behaved very well, doing whatever he was told and never actively causing trouble. Compared to the few King of Angels under Saussure who caused trouble every few days and required him to clean up after them, Antigonus was simply the best assistant. It seems you are very satisfied with him. Roland glanced at Saussure and said with a smile. He's a good child. Saussure didn't deny it and nodded. Then he reported to Roland about the various tasks he had handled during this time. With Saussure, the Heavenly Kingdom Vice-Monarch, present, the residents who had moved out of City of Silver and Moon City were naturally arranged properly. Those who learned quickly were already helping to build their homes, while those who learned slowly were still struggling with the language and common sense of the outside world. But overall, as long as no strange accidents occurred in the future, the residents of City of Silver and Moon City would be able to smoothly integrate into the outside world and build a better environment for those who would move out later. There is one matter that needs your personal decision, Saussure said after reporting on the current situation of the residents of City of Silver and Moon City. He then took out a list and said, Colin knows about the matter of the border city. After discussing with the person in charge of Moon City, he provided a list, hoping to contribute to our cause. I don't know if I should agree to him. Roland raised an eyebrow and took the list. He saw many familiar names on it, such as a certain Mr. Little Sun. He knew that Saussure didn't not know whether to agree or not, but rather couldn't make the decision for him. After all, City of Silver and Moon City were now Roland's believers. Even though Saussure had officially switched jobs to work under Roland, it was still not appropriate for him to overstep his authority and handle this matter. Chapter 366 Who is the strongest angel of the Go-San family? Chapter 366 Who is the strongest Go-3 family angel? Since they are so enthusiastic, let them participate. This is not a bad thing. Roland unhurriedly read the list from beginning to end, then he nodded and said, experiencing the revolution of blood and fire together will be more beneficial for them to integrate into the new era. Roland originally did not plan to force the City of Silver and Moon City people to join the revolution. After all, honestly speaking, external matters have little to do with the people of these two cities. The City of Silver and Moon City people have suffered so much in the forsaken land of the gods for so many years, and finally came to the world of light. If they were to be embroiled in war as soon as they arrived, that would be too tragic. If the war situation becomes critical in the future and they are at a disadvantage, Roland might consider conscripting people from these two cities to participate in the war, but if the war goes smoothly, there is really no need for the City of Silver and Moon City people to fight desperately. But since they voluntarily want to participate, Roland will not refuse. As you know, I never personally participate in matters of this kind, so you can arrange the rest. Roland then thought of something else, looked at Saussure, and said. He was fully committed to being a hands-off boss. I will arrange them properly. Saussure was a bit helpless but not surprised, and could only nod. The two then chatted about business for a while, and the colors around them changed. The next second, 3 figures appeared in this small study. Yo, you're back after the fight. Roland looked at the 3 family angels who returned after fighting, his gaze first falling on Amon. The latter looked calm and collected, seemingly no different from before he left, except that he had changed his clothes, but Roland always felt that something was missing from him. After staring at Amon for several seconds, Roland suddenly realized and asked, "Where is your main body?" What was referred to as Amon's main body naturally referred to Amon's signature monocle. That's right, at this moment, Amon's face was actually without that familiar crystal monocle. The calm and collected smile on Amon's face suddenly froze. Of course he was sealed. Don't look at him as if nothing happened, he's completely faking it. Before, Bethel struck him so hard that his worm of times were almost scorched. The Antigonus next to him said impatiently, smiling with considerable schadenfreude. Upon hearing this, Roland looked at the schadenfreude-filled demon wolf, then fell into a strange silence for a second before asking, "Littlein, why are your ears gone?" The schadenfreude-filled Antigonus's movement suddenly froze. Yes, the furry ears on the forehead of Antigonus in his demon wolf form had actually disappeared. Now the entire demon wolf's head looked round and furry, making Roland unable to resist reaching out and rubbing his round head a few times. Although it's a bit strange without ears, the feeling of stroking it smoothly all the way down seems quite interesting too. Roland commented inwardly. While Roland was rubbing a certain demon wolf's head, Amon casually rubbed his own eye socket and said unhurriedly, "His ears are over there." With his other hand, he gestured towards Mr. Door next to him. Huh. Roland was startled, then turned his head to look at Bethel, only to realize that Bethel had not only changed into new clothes but had also somehow put on a hat. And at this moment, facing Roland's slightly curious gaze, Bethel smiled helplessly, took off his hat, and as expected, a pair of demon wolf ears were on top of it. How strange. Roland examined the wolf ears that originally belonged to Antigonus, then looked at the helpless-looking Bethel, and commented, "Bethel, you're really not suited for acting cute." Bethel's features were the sharp kind. As long as he slightly furrowed his brow, he naturally exuded an air of authority. Therefore, even with a helpless expression at this moment, people would instinctively avoid his gaze. Bethel with a pair of wolf ears on top, it must be said, was really quite strange. "I don't think I meant to act cute." Bethel glanced at Roland, who was saying it was strange but clearly had an expression of enjoying the spectacle, and explained, "Amon did this. It will take me some time to fully remove the effect." "I guessed as much." Roland nodded, his gaze sweeping over the Go-3 family angels once more, and abruptly asked, "So, who won just now?" "It's probably hard to say who won," Bethel said, and then tactfully added, "Mainly, Amon was too hateable. I couldn't help but beat him up with Antigonus. Later, Amon teamed up with Antigonus and beat me up. So you're the only one who didn't get beaten up." Roland heard this, turned his head to glance at Antigonus, and asked. Antigonus, however, said dejectedly, "No, I got beaten up in both rounds. As everyone knows, when fighting in a group, you look for weaknesses in the weakest. Unfortunately, among the 3 family angels, Antigonus was the weakest, so when they were fighting just now, no matter which side he was on, the other side would first target him, wanting to knock him out of the battlefield first." Poor doggy. Roland was startled, then understood why. He sighed, reached out and rubbed the dog's head again, before looking at the others and saying, "All right, now that your group fight is over, let's talk about serious business." "What is it?" Saussure looked at him and asked. "Of course, it's to discuss how to rescue Tolsna, the bound god from the mother tree, and the subsequent matters concerning the Rose School of Thought." Roland had no intention of keeping anyone in suspense and spoke straightforwardly. Then, as if sensing something, he looked in a certain direction and said with a smile, "Ah, our coconut tree miss is here." As his words fell, the colors in this area changed again, and then Miss Reinette Tinaker's slightly strange figure appeared before everyone. Since they were going to discuss rescuing Tolsna, the bound god, how could they do without the student of the person involved, the leader of the temperance faction of the Rose School of Thought, Reinette Tinakel? Let me introduce everyone. This is Miss Reinette Tinekare, the student of Tolzna, the bound god, and also the former leader of the Rose School of Thought. Of course, she is currently being intensely hunted by the Rose School of Thought. Roland briefly introduced the presence of coconut tree mist to the people present, saying, "Probably no one among us understands the current Rose School of Thought better than her. Although she may not be of much use in battle, her participation is greatly needed for the subsequent cleanup work." Roland was not planning to kill all the members of the Rose School of Thought. Although most of them probably deserved it, firstly, with so many Beyonders, instead of killing them directly, it would be better to let them utilize their remaining value, such as serving as Death Warriors in the future revolution. Secondly, considering the influence of the Mother Tree and Mother Goddess on the Rose School of Thought, Roland could not rule out the possibility that among the remaining members of the Rose School of Thought, there might be existences like Tolzna, the bound god, who were not in control of themselves. For such existences, killing them directly without giving them a chance would be a pity. Xiaotuo. Chapter 367, The Plan to Save Little Tuo. So Roland's plan from the beginning was to rescue Tolzna, the bound god, while also gathering all the members of the Rose School of Thought, allowing them to play their biggest roles, and incidentally severing the Mother Tree's largest tendril in this world. After all, the decisive battle is in at most 10+ years. How inappropriate would it be not to deal with these dogs of the outer gods? Others might have many reservations about doing this, or might not have the ability. Roland has no such concerns. With the power of the Sun God, it's hard to say if he can win against the outer gods head-on outside of Earth, but the power that the Mother Tree has infiltrated. There's no way he can't handle that. Hello. I am honored to be able to participate in this matter. The four heads held by Reinette Tinekare spoke in turn. She didn't mind Roland's evaluation of her. After all, a half-crippled Sequence 2 angel, in a battlefield involving outer gods and king of angels, let alone contributing, it would be good enough just to save her own life. Reinette Tinekare was very clear about her role. In this battle, her role was to provide information and assist in handling various trivial matters. Reinette Tinekare had no dissatisfaction with this, just a slight daze. When she first met Lucifer, she had doubted whether Lucifer could do what he said. Even after witnessing Lucifer's miraculous abilities and trying her best to believe his words, she still thought that Tolzna, the bound god's rescue would be a matter of years, or even more than 10 years later. But Reinette Tinekare didn't expect that after only a few months, the latter had already decided to rescue Tolzna, the bound god from the Mother Tree. Reinette Tinekare didn't doubt whether Lucifer could succeed, but her mood was slightly complicated, with some joy mixed in with the shock, and a hint of sighing mixed in with the joy. Reinette Tinekare knew very well that if Tolzna, the bound god, was successfully rescued, she might not have the possibility of advancing further in this life. But, that was his former belief, his former teacher. Compared to her own advancement, Reinette Tinekare still hoped more that Tolzna, the bound god, could be rescued. Among the people present, not many knew Reinette Tinekare, only Amon. Among the others, Saussure probably knew of such an existence, Bethel vaguely heard the name, and Antigonus was completely bewildered. After all, when Amon was doing popular science for Antigonus recently, he was explaining some relatively important people. Amon didn't introduce someone like Reinette Tinekare, who wasn't close to Roland and could only be considered a peripheral collaborator. However, Antigonus knew Tolzna, the bound god. A long time ago, when this one was still Sequence 2, he had dealings with Antigonus. When Amon was explaining Roland's subordinates to Antigonus, he also mentioned this very, very miserable king of angels. And just then, the surrounding colors changed again, followed by a cursing figure reappearing before everyone. How many things do you have to find to do every day? You really don't care as long as the work doesn't need you to do it. Medici's gnashing voice rang out. How could the Red Angel be absent from something like fighting? This one was naturally also notified by Roland, but probably because there were more things to deal with, he arrived a little late. Don't be angry, Little Red. You don't need to handle the matters of the Rose School of Thought. As the saying goes, return to the source. I will naturally leave the Rose School of Thought for Torzan himself to handle. Asking you to come is just to have you assist a bit. After all, I'm not sure about Little Tuo's abilities in this regard, and Saussure is here too. Roland said with a smile. Torzan, what can he handle? He's been eroded by the mother tree for so many years. Are you sure he'll still have the energy to deal with these things after being rescued? Medici didn't buy into that and rolled his eyes irritably. He should be able to, right? Look at Bethel. As soon as he got rid of the outer god's pollution, he immediately reorganized the Abraham family. Besides, if little Tuo can't do it, aren't there alternatives? Roland said this, glancing at Renette Tinacle next to him. I am very familiar with the Rose school of thought. I can handle it well. The four heads held by Renette Tinacle immediately spoke. As the leader of the Temperance faction, she naturally still had abilities in this area. Although her current state wasn't great, she could still give it a try. Medici's expression improved slightly. He didn't actually object to rescuing Tolsna, the bound god. After all, from all perspectives, this was a good thing, but Medici really couldn't handle any more work. Although Roland recently gained his beloved Heavenly Kingdom Vice Monarch, theoretically Medici's workload should decrease, but the damned Roland, while getting saucier, also created a bunch of new tasks, such as the arrangements for the City of Silver and Moon City people, the establishment of rules, and the cooperation and contact with the Eternal Blaze Church, and so on. Saucier handled some of this, but the other parts ultimately fell on Medici. In addition, as the new year approached, Medici also had to prepare for the official launch of the upcoming changes. The overall workload, let alone decreasing, actually increased again. To be honest, if this continues, Medici really feels like he'll die suddenly. You're not as good as Saucier in this regard. He's been working non-stop recently. I advised him to rest for 2 days, but he refused. Roland said righteously. Medici heard this and sneered, looking at him and saying, then may I ask, while we are working hard, my dear boss, what are you doing? Roland suddenly felt a bit guilty. What was he doing? There was a lot. For example, his, Jack, persona had been watching Little K play Medici's daily life during this time, while his main account was watching the daily lives of the younger generation of the Abraham family. Honestly, watching drama is really a beneficial job for both body and mind. He loves it. Cough. Roland coughed lightly. If he were facing accusations from others, he wouldn't be like this, but the one in front of him was, after all, a good friend he recognized, the Red Angel who had been working tirelessly for him like an ox and a horse, undertaking most of the work. Even Roland felt his scalp tingle when he thought of Medici's workload. In a sense, Medici was Roland's Heavenly Kingdom Vice Monarch. Without the Red Angel, many things would probably come to a standstill. How about I arrange some assistance for you? Roland suggested softly. The God of Wisdom should contact me during this time. How about I have him send some suitable people to assist you then? Different professions have their specialties. People sent from other churches for cooperation are suitable for handling other matters, such as combat, farming, or practicing medicine, while members of the Church of Knowledge and Wisdom are clearly the chosen tools for handling affairs. As for whether they are loyal or not, that's not important. Roland believes in the Dragon of Betrayal's art of taking sides, and also believes that Medici isn't that easy to fool. Chapter 368 Roland, it's fun to be naughty. Hearing Roland's words, Medici's expression softened a little. Then, he clicked his tongue and said, so you're just going to slack off to the end. Otherwise. Roland showed a puzzled expression and looked at Medici, asking back as if it were a matter of course, I've already done my part of the work. You can't possibly expect me to both negotiate with the gods and handle these trivial matters, right? Roland spread his hands at this point, then grinned and said, of course, I can slack off, thanks to everyone's efforts, especially you, Little Red. You are my Heavenly Kingdom Vice Monarch. What would I do without you? He said it with such sincerity that Medici rolled his eyes directly and said impatiently, all right, stop being disgusting. I know you've worked hard. Remember to recruit 20 assistants for me later. If there's one less, you can do the work yourself. I'm not doing it. Good heavens, are you eating assistants here? Roland immediately showed a surprised expression. Medici glanced at him and said with a sneer, what do you think my workload is like? A series of tasks Medici had recently handled flashed through Roland's mind, and he instantly fell silent, nodding with an exceptionally obedient expression, indicating that there was no problem. Roland then thought of something else and looked at Saucier, whose expression was clearly a bit tired. With a rare pang of conscience, he asked, Sorcerer, how about I also assign you 20 assistants? Sorcerer was stunned for a moment. He thought for about a few seconds, then nodded and said, okay, with people to help, my work efficiency will be higher. Roland was also stunned when he heard this. He looked at Sorcerer, then at Medici. Under the ladders, what do you want to do now? Gaze, he sighed and shook his head again. He didn't say anything, and yet it seemed like he said everything. Medici. Sorcerer. Sorcerer's smile became increasingly helpless, yet it carried a hint of tolerance, fully showcasing his, male mother, demeanor. Medici, on the other hand, let out a cold laugh. He snapped his fingers, and the colors around him changed, clearly preparing to leave directly. Don't go, little Red, I was just joking. But before the Red Angel's figure disappeared, a certain unscrupulous boss quickly grabbed him with sharp eyes and swift hands. Roland held Medici's arm and said with a sheepish smile. Sorcerer has been completely spoiled by Sun God ABC and has become a 007. This is not desirable. You are different, you are a normal person. I fully support you in fighting for your own interests. I am a good boss. Let go. Medici forcefully pulled his arm back from Roland's hand. Hearing Roland's rare sensible words, he couldn't help but glance at the other party, then said, it's fun to be naughty. Medici naturally knew that a certain person actually understood everything and was deliberately trying to anger him just now. Of course, it's fun to be naughty. Roland released Medici's hand and laughed without any reservation. Then he reached out and patted Medici's shoulder, saying with a smile, so, do you feel a little better? Are you serious? Medici glanced at him. Of course, I'm serious. Roland nodded, then said with a smile, all right, I know you've been working hard lately. After this busy period is over, I'll give you a long vacation. I hope there will be a day when it's not busy. Medici said this, his expression having improved considerably. He then scanned everyone present with his gaze and said with a slight hint of confusion, is the sun god not participating? Sorcerer will relay the specific details of this operation to the sun god. Roland gestured to Sorcerer next to him and said, because Sorcerer himself will also be involved in the subsequent parts of the work, and currently I can't have him coexist with the sun god, so I'll let him represent himself and the sun god in this meeting for now. Anyway, the sun god only needs to provide force protection. It doesn't matter whether he participates or not. Roland spread his hands and said as if it were a matter of course. You make it sound like the sun god is your thug. Medici glanced at Roland and said. Isn't he? Roland asked him back in confusion. Tisk. Medici clicked his tongue but didn't refute. He then grabbed a chair and sat down, his ruby-like eyes raised, looking at Roland and saying, sometimes I really don't know if you respect the sun god or not. Of course, I respect him very much, but that doesn't conflict with me treating him as a thug. Just like I also like you very much, but it doesn't prevent me from treating you as a tool. Roland smiled, then he took out a few chairs from his spatial pocket and greeted the others. I almost forgot, everyone, please sit down. There's no need to stand for the meeting. Although the others had various expressions, they didn't refuse. They each took a chair and sat down. After everyone was seated, Roland didn't continue to bicker with Medici but began to preside over the meeting seriously, starting to discuss the upcoming action to rescue Tolzna, the bound god with everyone. Interestingly, although the theme was rescuing Tolzna, the bound god, there wasn't actually much to discuss about the matter itself. After all, the process was very simple. Roland would take the sun god to snatch back Tolzna, the bound god, and then perform surgery on him to stabilize the pollution and so on. For others, this might be the most difficult part of the entire operation, but for Roland's group, the difficulty was just so-so. What Roland and the others mainly discussed were the other two parts. One was how to minimize the negative impact of this matter on ordinary people. After all, destruction is simpler than rescue. How to prevent Mother Tree and Rose School of Thought from going crazy, seeing that the general trend is irreversible, and indiscriminately harming innocent people is a topic worth discussing. Fortunately, Renette Tinacle provided the coordinates of the Rose School of Thought's strongholds and the corresponding list of Rose School of Thought members, which greatly reduced the difficulty of handling the matter. The work for the last part was assigned to Amon and Bethel. The former's clones are spread throughout the entire North and South continents and can quickly pinpoint targets, while the latter possesses extremely strong mobility and can compensate in the shortest possible time if any accidents occur. Upon hearing this arrangement, Amon reached out and pushed the monocle that had reappeared on his face at some point, saying, "Why am I included in the arrangements? Aren't I just here to join in the fun?" Roland glanced at him when he heard this, then smiled and said, "I'm giving you an opportunity to atone for the sins you committed before. Don't you want it? If I atone, will I no longer take the villain card in the future?" Amon didn't answer directly with, "Want," or, "Don't want," but instead asked back, "At least then, when I beat you up in the future, I'll hesitate a bit." Roland smiled and looked at him, saying, "That doesn't sound very useful." Amon said this, with a clear understanding of himself. After all, with my personality, it's impossible not to court death. Chapter 369, When can little K reach sequence 2? So are you going to do it or not? If you don't want this job, I'll arrange it for someone else. Roland glanced at him, not listening to his continued nonsense, and asked directly. Clearly, when facing a certain trash Amon, Roland didn't have much patience. "I am honored to be able to contribute to the fight against the outer gods," Amon said without a second's hesitation. "Not bad." Roland nodded and continued to preside over the meeting. After solving this part of the problem, the main content of the meeting was only one thing left, which was the handling of the Rose School of Thought members and the impact of taking down the Rose School of Thought. The Rose School of Thought was not a small force. In fact, even after being suppressed by the seven gods, due to its past foundation, the Rose School of Thought's reach still extended almost throughout the South Continent, having a significant influence in the South Continent and considerable power in the 5 seas. Before this, we had already taken down the numinous episcopate. If we successfully take down the entire Rose School of Thought this time, with the influence of these 2 organizations in the South Continent, the subsequent reform work in the South Continent will be much easier. Roland said unhurriedly, "This is also why I value the Rose School of Thought. It is not just a tentacle of the outer gods. If used well, it is also an accelerator for our reform work. The only thing I'm not sure about is whether we can control the situation while carrying out work in both the North and South continents simultaneously." Roland looked at Medici when he said this. Although a considerable part of the subsequent reform work would be handed over to Saussure, Medici would still hold the most important part. "I knew 20 assistants weren't that easy to get." Medici pouted but wasn't surprised. He then thought for a few seconds and said, "The situation in the South Continent is very complex. Various countries, major churches, and organizations all have a certain reach there, but precisely because of this, they are not united. With control over the numinous episcopate and the Rose School of Thought, I am confident in controlling the situation. Then I'll leave it to you. If you're short on staff, you can tell me, and I'll do my best to get you more people." Roland nodded and then discussed other trivial matters with the others, such as the transformation of Rose School of Thought members and whether to announce this matter to the world later. After discussing these matters, it was already getting dark. Roland stretched lazily and said, "Let's stop here for today. Everyone, go back and rest well. At 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, everyone will gather on time, and then we will give the Mother Tree and the Mother Goddess a little earth shock." The reason for mentioning the Mother Tree and the Mother Goddess is that the outer gods affecting the Rose School of Thought are not just the Mother Tree. Although Tolsna, the bound god, is in his hands, many other members of the Rose School of Thought are influenced by the Mother Goddess. After all, the 2 of them share the alias of the original moon, and most of the Rose School of Thought members are believers of the original moon. While the meeting here ended, Roland, wearing the Jack alias, also found Little K, who was dealing with affairs. Little K, the old guy has a big operation tomorrow. Do you want to join in the fun?" Roland's voice was cheerful, perfectly maintaining the persona of a sunny and cheerful college student. Little K put down a document in his hand and looked up at his companion. Looking at Jack's cheerful appearance, he somehow thought of the golden retriever he had seen before. He then shook his head, suppressing this association from his mind, and asked curiously, "What big operation?" During this time, Little K had been diligently playing the role of Medici in the border city, handling various affairs. It could be said that he had spent the most comfortable and busiest period since transmigrating. It was comfortable because he had finally gotten rid of his trouble-attracting constitution, and no endless extraordinary events came looking for him. It was busy because there were really many affairs to handle. Although the most important part had been handled by Medici, the remaining workload was still considerable. In addition, Little K's sense of responsibility did not allow him to be perfunctory, so in the initial period, Little K handled things with great difficulty. He basically had to ask a Fu about everything to ensure that his handling was correct. Fortunately, a Fu was indeed a very capable assistant who also knew how to teach, and Little K was an even better student. So after the most difficult period, Little K had long become adept at handling work, but he was only a sequence 6 after all, and naturally couldn't stay up all night like big shots like Medici and Saussure. So now that there was more and more work, there were still times when he couldn't handle it all. Fortunately, Saussure was truly heartwarming. After discovering Little K's busy state, he voluntarily shared a lot of work, which relieved Little K while also making him feel a little guilty. Roland suddenly stopped because he remembered something very important, which was that Little K was not yet sequence 2 and couldn't know anything about the outer gods. In this case, it was really best for Little K not to join in the fun of the Rose School of Thought. Little K, when are you going to advance to sequence 2? Roland asked faintly after being silent for several seconds. Little K was stunned. Due to his tacit understanding with his companion, he instantly understood the reason for the other party's words. So Little K shook his head with a slight smile and said, "That will probably take a long time. I'm only sequence 6. Roland pouted, then thought of something else and asked, "Logically speaking, you've been playing Medici for a long time, and you haven't shown any flaws in front of others. The faceless potion should be almost digested, right?" Little K didn't deny it and nodded, saying, "In a few more days, my faceless potion will be completely digested. After the potion is digested, I plan to ask Mr. Lucifer for a few days off to find a mermaid to complete the ritual and advance to sequence 5. Little K didn't lack the materials for a puppet master. In fact, because he was working for Medici, a certain red angel was very generous and even gathered the potion materials and formula for a bizarro sorcerer for Little K. Going out to sea. Roland pinched his chin and thought for a few seconds, then said excitedly, "Then let's go together." Little K glanced at Roland, who was clearly up to something, smiled helplessly, but didn't refuse, nodding and saying, "Okay." Roland then started thinking about what interesting things there were in the 5 Cs. When he thought about it, there were quite a few. For example, a certain Bansi related to the City of Calamity, a certain sea god who hasn't died yet but is about to die, a certain red maid who randomly appears, a certain underachiever Anderson who is very suitable to be caught and used as an assistant for Medici, a certain lurking elf queen, and so on. While the main account is doing serious business, the alt account can also find some fun. Roland is not picky, he likes fun from both high and low sequences. Chapter 370, The Mother Tree Really Had Terrible Luck. For the Mother Tree of Desire, this was originally a very ordinary day. As usual, it was entrenched on the Crimson Moon, vying for territory with a certain mother goddess, and incidentally observing the situation on Earth through the barrier, focusing on checking the status of Tolsna, the bound god, and also spot-checking its other believers. After confirming that nothing had happened, the Mother Tree couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief, yet sadness welled up in its heart. Once upon a time, as an outer god, why would it need to check on the status of its tentacles on Earth every day like this, fearing that it would wake up one day to find that all the assets it had painstakingly accumulated were gone? The former Mother Tree, as a relatively powerful existence among the outer gods, although unable to descend to Earth in its true form due to the barrier, through gradual infiltration and the influence of the pathways themselves, while it didn't achieve as much as the Mother Goddess, who influenced the Earth Mother, took down Rosal, and even controlled Mr. Door, it did manage to control Tolsna, the bound god. The Mother Tree even dared to say that although Tolsna, the bound god, whom it had taken down, was only an king of angels, he could play a greater role than the 2 sequence 0s and 1 strongest king of angels next door. After all, one of those 2 sequence 0s hadn't completely fallen, one had fallen but became a useless piece by exploiting a bug, and the strongest king of angels had sealed himself. How could they compare to an king of angels who was completely under its control and still free? However, since the appearance of some particularly sinister fellow, whatever it was, both the Mother Tree and the Mother Goddess began to pay the price for their past actions. Especially the Mother Goddess, who had contaminated more people, was truly miserable. Every few days, the Mother Tree could hear her high-pitched screams, so much so that the Mother Tree wanted to give the title, Shrieker, to the other party. But the Mother Tree itself wasn't doing much better. Although the only one on its side who suffered at the hands of Roland was Tolsna, the bound god, this still made the Mother Tree suffer. And precisely because this was its only sprout, the Mother Tree became even more nervous. If one day Tolsna, the bound god, were to escape its control like Mr. Door and Rosal next door, it would be an unbearable loss for the Mother Tree. To put it bluntly, even if the Mother Goddess lost Rosal and Mr. Door, she still had Lilith whom she could influence, and because of the characteristics of her pathway, this influence was difficult to change. Moreover, the Mother Goddess herself was powerful. Even if she lost these tentacles, when the final battle with Earth came in the future, she would still be that unstoppable third pillar. The Mother Tree was different. Once it lost Tolsna, the bound god, even if it had other backups on Earth, it wouldn't be able to find a tool of the same level again. The Mother Tree was not as powerful as the Mother Goddess. When the Earth barrier broke, without these tentacles functioning, it would be difficult for it to bypass the Mother Goddess and snatch what it wanted. Although, thinking of that sinister unknown entity, the Mother Tree fell silent. With such a sinister entity present, could they, the outer gods, really gain an advantage after the barrier broke? The Mother Tree was very doubtful. It was originally full of confidence regarding the final battle. Earth currently didn't even have an old one, and there were only a little over 10 years left until the final battle. Normally, it would be impossible to produce any decisive combat power at this critical juncture. It would be good enough if the Lord of the Mysteries could be born. And although the Lord of the Mysteries was powerful, their side had many gods and great power. No matter how strong the Lord of the Mysteries was, facing existences of the same old one level, even 2 fists were no match for 4 hands. He couldn't withstand all of them. Therefore, the Mother Tree had always been very confident about invading Earth. But now, the Mother Tree hesitated. It was truly worried now about the extent to which that sinister entity would recover when the Earth barrier broke over a decade later. The Mother Tree wasn't stupid. After a few contacts, it had basically determined that the opponent's existence was fundamentally very high, but currently should be in a weakened state and unable to exert much power. Otherwise, with such an essence, the opponent wouldn't need to hide on Earth. What made it even harder for the Mother Tree to ignore was that the strength the opponent displayed in several contacts had quite obvious changes, which meant the opponent was rapidly recovering. So, what state would the opponent recover to over a decade later? The Mother Tree even somewhat dared not think about it, yet it couldn't do anything. If the opponent had come outside the barrier at this stage, the Mother Tree might still be able to try uniting with other outer gods to strangle it, making it fall again before it recovered. But precisely because that damned barrier was there, the Mother Tree couldn't do this, and the power it could infiltrate through the barrier clearly couldn't do anything to that fellow. This made the Mother Tree feel somewhat powerless, a sense of despair like watching its own death progress bar advance, yet being unable to stop it. So why would such an existence stand on Earth's side? Logically, shouldn't it be on our side? The Mother Tree mused faintly. Just then, it suddenly froze for a moment, its gaze cast towards Earth again. It could feel that in that extremely short period just now, its believers who were scattered across the world and were under close watch were actually attacked at the same time. As for the one who acted, it seemed to be Amon. This made the Mother Tree's heart skip a beat. It had already realized something and almost immediately issued the command to run to God Spawn Saya, who was currently still at the Rose School of Thought headquarters, and provided it with as much power enhancement as possible through the barrier. The Mother Tree had realized that its greatest fear might have become reality. Roland had indeed made a move against its side, and the opponent was clearly not just targeting Tolsna, the bound god, but also wanted to wipe out the Rose School of Thought in one go. Based on the Mother Tree's understanding of a certain person, it was very clear that since the opponent chose to do this, they must have confidence. The Rose School of Thought members who were dealt with by the opponent in an extremely short time were clear proof of this. Under these circumstances, even what the mother tree could do was only to preserve as much vital force as possible. It didn't expect to save Tolzna, the bound god, but for God's spawn Saya, the mother tree still wanted to struggle a bit. It wasn't out of motherly love, but simply because without God's spawn Saya, it would be very inconvenient for it to do anything on Earth in the future. While ordering God's spawn Saya to run, the mother tree also didn't forget the existence of Tolzna, the bound god. Although it no longer expected to save the other party, no matter what, it had to let this toy play its final role. Precisely because of this, the mother tree decisively controlled Tolzna, the bound god, and immediately prepared to launch an attack on the surrounding human cities. It was very clear that although it didn't care about these ant-like things, those saviors couldn't possibly not care. So, as long as it made good use of this point, it could make Tolzna, the bound god, tie down those fellows, thereby creating an opportunity for God's spawn Saya to escape. However, the next second, the mother tree's expression became very ugly. As expected, guarding against you jumping the wall in desperation is a very necessary thing. Roland looked at Tolzna, the bound god, who was clearly controlled by the mother tree in front of him, and said with a slight smile. Standing beside him were Bethel and the sun god. And the space they were currently in was not the headquarters of the Rose School of Thought. In fact, because they had long anticipated the mother tree's actions, just before Tolzna, the bound god, went crazy, Bethel had used the power of space to transfer Tolzna, the bound god, into Roland's different dimension. Chapter 371, Mother Tree Negotiates Online. Of course, even if Tolzna, the bound god didn't go crazy, Bethel would still do this. The sun god was indeed powerful, but the mother tree on the other side was not to be trifled with. With the mother tree's blessing, Tolzna, the bound god could last for a while against the sun god. This made it difficult for both sides to completely contain their destructive power once they started fighting. To avoid a tragedy like that in the forsaken land of the gods, the existence of an alternate dimension was very necessary. The mother tree's will, which had descended upon Tolzna, the bound god, stared at Roland, then suddenly smiled and said, "But my goal was originally just to tie you down. From this perspective, it has already been achieved." "I know." Roland nodded without surprise, showing a confused expression as he looked at the mother tree and said, "But how can you be sure that I haven't sent someone to deal with God's spawn Saya? To be honest, dealing with your lackeys is indeed a troublesome matter. Even Bethel cannot simultaneously transfer Little Tuo and God's spawn Saya to an alternate dimension. Although some of my subordinates are stronger than God's spawn Saya, it is indeed a bit troublesome to avoid harming the innocent to the greatest extent possible." Roland said this sincerely. God's spawn Saya was after all a sequence 1, and had the mother goddess's blessing. It would not be easy for a normal king of angels to take her down. Even if Antigonus and Medici attacked at the same time, it would be difficult to control the scope of the battle, and a slip-up could cause huge casualties. Although the sun god was present and should not take too long to deal with Tolzna, the bound god, and could quickly support the battle there, with the destructive power at the angel level, even just a few seconds would be a huge disaster for ordinary people. This was also one of the reasons why Earth had not dealt with these outer gods' lackeys. After all, Earth was fighting on home ground. Facing these powerful lackeys, once they couldn't achieve an overwhelming victory, it would cause huge casualties. Especially now that deities cannot easily leave the star realm, it is even harder to achieve an overwhelming victory. Moreover, even if Tolzna, the bound god and God's spawn Saya were dealt with, the other Rose School of Thought members scattered throughout the northern continent were still a big problem. Not everyone like Amon had avatars all over the world, and not everyone had Mr. Door's mobility. Once the other Rose School of Thought members could not be dealt with in time, the destructive power they could unleash when cornered would also be huge. Only Roland could perfectly handle these troubles. Calculating the time, it should be almost done over there. Roland suddenly pulled out a pocket watch from somewhere, glanced at it, and said with a smile. As his voice fell, the mother tree's expression on the opposite side instantly became difficult to look at. She, who had been paying attention to God's spawn Saya, naturally knew what had happened. Just now, God's spawn Saya, who had almost broken out of the encirclement, encountered Antigonus. Then, God spawned Saya and the other party were transferred together to a strange town filled with mist. There, God spawned Saya met a woman, who was the Evernight goddess who had briefly left the star realm. It seems you're also paying attention over there. Roland's smile immediately became even brighter. As everyone knows, outer gods are different from the evil gods on Earth. Dealing with outer gods is everyone's responsibility. Roland is not the kind of fool who suffers for the sake of appearances and doesn't call for help when he clearly can. So, after discovering the lack of combat power, Roland decisively chose to call for help. He called over the Evernight goddess Amonizes. With the Sun God's help, the rift blocked by the Black Knight Divine Kingdom temporarily did not need to be worried about, and the Evernight goddess could naturally free up her hands to deal with Godspawn Saya. The Mother Tree, which had descended upon Tolzna, the bound god, on the opposite side was silent for a moment, then suddenly spoke, "I don't understand why you would choose Earth. You should have stood on our side. We are your kind. If you are willing, we can completely support you to become the new creator. You are more qualified than the Mother Goddess of Depravity." Her words seemed sincere, her attitude was not humble, but at least respectful, and full of seductive power. "If you like Earth, we can also give it to you as your toy. Killing and destruction are meaningless to us. From beginning to end, we only hope to reclaim everything we have lost." Hearing this, Roland smiled. He looked up at the Mother Tree, his golden eyes showing no emotion, and said, "That sounds truly exciting." Bethel and the Sun God next to him couldn't help but look at Roland at this moment, but there wasn't much tension in their eyes because they both knew what kind of person Roland was. They were only worried about the minuscule but indeed existing possibility of Roland going crazy. After all, the actions of a joker are sometimes hard to predict. "If you don't believe my words, I can sign a contract under the witness of the Sun God beside you. He is the most powerful recognized person at present. Although he has not officially become God, the contract he notarizes still has enough binding force for us." Seeing that Roland did not directly refuse, the Mother Tree quickly continued to add weight. "Hey, you've thought it through quite well." Roland couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. He then glanced at the two people beside him and suddenly joked. "Are you tempted? Theoretically speaking, if I were really supported by the outer gods to be the boss, and Earth became my toy, then perhaps there would indeed be no need to worry about the end of the world." A little. The Sun God nodded without hiding it, then said, "Unfortunately, I know better that compromise cannot bring true peace. I can never hand over Earth's safety to the mercy of others, even if that person is you." What a ruthless accusation. Roland raised his eyebrows and said, "But theoretically speaking, even if we eliminate all the outer gods in the future, Earth's safety will still be closely related to me." The Sun God glanced at him, did not refute, but said, "At least after eliminating the outer gods, we only need to deal with you. If we don't eliminate the outer gods, that is true despair." "That's right, killing potential enemies is indeed the most reassuring thing." Roland nodded, not angry at all because of the Sun God's words. He then looked at Bethel and asked, "What about you, Bethel, what do you think?" Bethel met his gaze and said gently and firmly, "I think you probably haven't forgotten that, aside from the greater good, I also have a personal grudge against the outer gods." He didn't say anything about grand principles, as the Sun God had already said it, nor did he say that the outer gods were untrustworthy, as that was obvious. Bethel simply stated a fact. Because Bethel knew very well that Roland was a protective person. Compared to the greater good of saving the world, helping a friend take revenge was more likely to move him. "That's right, you suffered so much at the hands of the Mother Goddess, you have to get revenge, otherwise wouldn't all your years of suffering be in vain?" Roland nodded, then he looked at Tolzna, the bound god, and said with a smile. "Little Tuo is the same. He is my employee after all. If I don't get revenge for him being so miserable, I would be too much of a scumbag. So if you really want me to cooperate, can you please die? If so, I might actually consider it." The Mother Tree on the opposite side, who had just been confident of victory, froze. What a joke, he proposed the suggestion just now to avoid death. "It seems you still chose Earth." The Mother Tree, who could see Roland's attitude by now, no longer tried to persuade him and spoke coldly. "How fresh, Earth is much more interesting than you. As for what creator, PFFT." Roland no longer pretended. He couldn't help but laugh, and then said slowly. If I wanted to be some kind of ruler, some kind of creator, I wouldn't be here. Chapter 372, The Lonely Old Sun God. It's hard to say whether the Mother Tree was sincerely negotiating with Roland, but Roland clearly had no intention of negotiating with the other party from beginning to end. After all, for him, the outer gods, whose depths could be seen at a glance, were too boring. How could they compare to the diverse beings on Earth? And after the negotiations broke down, the two sides, who could originally maintain superficial peace, naturally chose to go to war. Undoubtedly, the god of the bound Toltsana, who was divinely descended by the Mother Tree, was very strong. An ordinary Sequence Zero might not be able to defeat this king of angels. If any of the 7 gods were standing here at this moment, they might not be defeated, but it's really hard to say if they could capture the opponent. After all, Bethel is still just an king of angels now. He can trap the god of the bound Toltsana controlled by the Mother Tree for a short time, but over time, it's hard to say whether the Mother Tree, as an old one, can break the blockade and escape directly. But who made the Mother Tree face the Sun God at this moment? Although he has not yet become God, he is already infinitely close. In terms of strength, he may not even be weaker than the Mother Tree's main body. Fighting a god of the bound Toltsana controlled by the Mother Tree is no problem at all. Soon, the god of the bound Toltsana was defeated and suppressed by the Sun God, and then sealed by Bethel. This time I lost. The will of the Mother Tree attached to the god of the bound Toltsana did not withdraw directly. He looked up at Roland, his gaze filled with an emotion that was hard to describe. The Mother Tree suddenly started laughing. He said, "But I'm very curious, in the future, when this world no longer needs you, how will they treat you?" Such a low-level attempt at sowing discord. Roland looked back at him, raised an eyebrow, and made a conclusion. "It is sowing discord, but it's also the truth, isn't it?" Ha ha. The Mother Tree laughed, using the eyes of the god of the bound Toltsana to look at the Sun God and Bethel beside him, his tone filled with malice and anticipation. "They need you, they fear you, they see you as a friend, they see you as an enemy, ha ha ha, this is too interesting, isn't it? Perhaps, after you solve this for them, their blades will be pointed at you." The Mother Tree said this and looked at Roland again, the malice in his tone almost solidifying. "At that time, I wonder if you will regret your choice today." Roland was silent. He quietly stared at the Mother Tree in front of him, not knowing what he was thinking. This made the atmosphere on the scene seem a bit heavy for a moment, and it also made the corner of the Mother Tree's mouth curl up slightly. "Why don't you say something I don't know?" After a long silence, Roland finally spoke. He looked at the Mother Tree with a serious expression and said, "Is there a possibility that I know all of this, and I'm quite happy about it?" The smile on the Mother Tree's face froze. "You are really strange. Don't you know that the best kind of emotion between people is this kind of emotion where they are both friends and potential enemies?" Roland looked at the Mother Tree with a look that said, "You are really tasteless," shook his head, and said, "Tasteless fellow, beyond saving, bury him." Roland's words were sincere. Maybe normal people would mind, but because Roland's values are different from ordinary people, he not only doesn't mind this situation, but is actually quite happy to see it. How interesting is this? It perfectly aligns with Roland's aesthetic of human nature. And Roland showed a puzzled expression, looked at the Mother Tree in front of him, and asked seriously, "Won't you also be wary of me, fear me, and point your blade at me when you can in the future?" The Mother Tree's expression froze when he heard this, and then he said, "We can sign a contract." "A contract can be signed and can be torn up." Roland interrupted him, and then showed a brilliant smile, saying, "Admit it, you are less trustworthy and more dangerous than humans. Since there is a possibility of being backstabbed, why wouldn't I choose the side I prefer and which is less dangerous to me?" The Mother Tree was unable to refute for a moment. Roland then smiled at the Sun God and Bethel and said, "Sirs, I have chosen you so firmly, don't you have anything to show?" The Sun God's smile was gentle with a hint of helplessness. He spread his hands and said, "My saucer already belongs to you, Medici has long been poached by you, Amon was half sold and half given away, you also know about Adam, Ouroboros cannot follow you. I have nothing left to give you. It seems so." Roland nodded, pinched his chin, and suddenly showed a sympathetic expression to the Sun God, saying, "How pitiful, Grisha, you're about to become a lonely old sun god." "So, Roland's tone changed, and he said righteously, I am indeed a very good boss, everyone wants to work for me. The sun god's smile became even more helpless when he heard this. He shook his head and said tactfully, you are indeed a very good boss, but perhaps it would be better to appropriately increase the vacation time for employees. Look at what you're saying, it's just been too busy recently. After this period of time is over, I will definitely let them rest. Roland said this, and then thought of something, looking at Bethel beside him, and said, Bethel, the sun god is about to become a lonely old sun god, what about you? Bethel met Roland's golden eyes. He raised his hand and placed it on his chest, bowing slightly and smiling as he spoke. I have long pledged allegiance to you, and everything I have belongs to you, your majesty. Hiss. Roland gasped, clearly thrilled by Bethel's ritualistic behavior. He looked at Bethel in front of him and couldn't help but exclaim, Bethel, you are indeed my loyal minister, you have not failed my expectations of you. Roland felt that he understood a little bit how those ancient emperors felt when facing various declarations of loyalty from their subordinates, especially when the person pledging allegiance to you is a famous minister. That feeling, tisk. Indeed, life still needs a sense of ritual. No, I have to find a way to trick Little Red into doing the same thing for me. Roland's thoughts then drifted a bit. It didn't matter to others, but if the Great Red Angel could also go through such a process of pledging allegiance to him, even if it was just a simplified version, Roland would feel great. There was no special reason, mainly because that's how it should be between close friends, the same principle as being roommates, dads. It seems I was being redundant. Just as Roland was full of bad ideas, the Mother Tree's voice suddenly sounded. Roland also came back to his senses. He then looked at the Mother Tree and suddenly walked towards him. After walking in front of the other party, Roland smiled at the Mother Tree and then spoke very gentlemanly, the irrelevant topics end here, madam. Now let's talk about serious matters. As he said this, he reached out and gently pressed the god of the bound Toltsona's head, saying, for example, can you please leave someone else's subordinate's body, madam? Chapter 373 Welcome back to the human world. Roland said this, as if asking, but at the same moment he spoke, the power belonging to Nyarlathotep had already invaded the body of God of the bound Toltsona. Then he paused and let out a tisk. Ran really fast. Roland could feel that at this moment, there was no longer any will belonging to the Mother Tree within the body of God of the bound Toltsona. Although the other party's contamination still existed within God of the bound Toltsona, the will of the Mother Tree that had just descended had clearly fled quickly. What a pity, I still wanted to study it. Roland shook his head, thought for a moment, and looked at Bethel and Sun God next to him, saying, I just checked Little Two's physical condition. His state is even worse than yours, Bethel. It's best to perform surgery immediately. Fortunately, I already have enough experience, otherwise it would be quite difficult. One of you two stay here to accompany me for the surgery, and the other go watch elsewhere to avoid any accidents. Roland said this, looking at the two who hadn't moved, and reminded, you decide who stays. Hearing this, Sun God and Bethel exchanged glances, and the latter immediately said, I'll stay. Sun God Mr. can go check on the situation with God Sponsea. Although Evernight Goddess is there, that is still the son of the Mother Tree after all. It will be safer if you go. Okay. Sun God thought for half a second, then nodded. God of the bound Toltsona felt like he had a long nightmare. In that nightmare, he was captured by the Mother Tree, his power was eroded bit by bit, he tried to resist but to no avail, until he was completely reduced to the other party's puppet and was even forced to give birth to a child. It was hard to say, for God of the bound Toltsona in the nightmare, which was more painful, death or continuing to live. He also didn't have the ability to think or the opportunity to choose. During the rare moments of lucidity, God of the bound Toltsona would occasionally think whether he should have fallen as early as the fourth epoch. That way, at least none of this would have happened. He wouldn't have become a puppet of the outer gods, nor would he have become a minion for the outer gods invading this world. But occasionally, God of the bound Toltsona would feel unwilling. He was unwilling for his fate to be such an ending more humiliating than death, and even more unwilling that in this humiliating fate, he couldn't even self-destruct with the other party. Powerlessness and despair lingered around God of the bound Toltsona, making him want to tightly grasp something, like someone about to drown in water, even if it was just a straw that couldn't save him at all. To be reasonable, although this might be a pirate ship, it's not as bad as a straw, right? A slightly dissatisfied voice sounded at this moment, causing God of the Bound Toltsona, who was desperately trying to grasp something, to instinctively tremble. His muddled brain suddenly became clearer, and more memories returned, making him recall some forgotten things. For example, the nightmare just now was real. He did indeed experience that fate more terrifying than death. Another example, at the end of the nightmare, when everything seemed irreversible, he encountered a strange existence. That existence was like a giant ship on the sea, which, whoosh, threw a wooden board to him, the drowning fellow, and even promised to fish him up later. You. God of the Bound Toltsona opened his mouth, his voice a little weak. He was clearly still very confused and didn't know what to say. Don't get excited, your surgery isn't finished yet. Just now, we can only say the first stage is complete. After all, your situation is quite special. If we don't wake up your will first, the subsequent contamination balance surgery will be quite difficult. Roland said this, looking at God of the Bound Toltsona's eager to learn eyes, and after thinking for a moment, added, "Oh right, I snatched you back from the mother tree. So from now on, you are my tool person alive, and my tool ghost dead. Be happy." At this moment, it was hard to describe God of the Bound Toltsona's expression. It could probably be described as somewhere between crying and laughing, with great joy and sorrow. Don't get excited, don't get excited. Don't you know how weak you are? Roland gave him an annoyed look, reached out and patted him, and deliberately said, "What, you really don't want to be my tool person? Then I'm going to get angry. No, I just feel like I'm dreaming." God of the Bound Toltsona struggled to shake his head, his voice weak and a little dazed. He looked at Roland above him, his eyes seemingly looking at the other party, yet also seeming unfocused, and just said, "I am free, right? Strictly speaking, not really, after all, you still have to work for me in the future." Roland first shook his head, then hooked the corner of his mouth and said, "However, if you mean not having to be a puppet for the outer gods anymore, then yes, you are free. Toltsona, welcome back to the human world I promised." God of the Bound Toltsona's condition was not good, even worse than Bethel's. After all, although Bethel was contaminated by the outer gods, fortunately, he sealed himself in time and hadn't truly fallen into the mother goddess's hands. God of the Bound Toltsona was different. This guy truly fell into the mother tree's hands and could be said to have suffered endless torment. This also meant that when Roland finally finished the surgery on God of the Bound Toltsona and balanced the contamination within his body, this king of angels looked completely listless, as if his essence, energy, and spirit had been sucked away by some monster. "Are you okay, little Two?" Roland reached out and waved his hand in front of God of the Bound Toltsona, whose expression seemed to be dazed, and asked, "You weren't cured into an idiot by me, were you?" "I'm fine." God of the Bound Toltsona came back to his senses. He shook his head, looked at Roland, and said, "Sorry, I'm just a little tired. I might need to rest." God of the Bound Toltsona was truly tired in every sense of the word. On one hand, his body had just undergone a major battle under the control of the mother tree. Not only was his physical strength exhausted, but his spirituality was also depleted, and he needed a rest to recover. On the other hand, after so many years of torment, God of the Bound Toltsona's mental state was not good to begin with. Although Roland was very careful during the recent treatment, due to the characteristics of Nyarlathotep's power, this treatment still couldn't avoid becoming another form of torment. In this situation, although God of the Bound Toltsona was happy, he really couldn't muster much energy. It could be said that what God of the Bound Toltsona needed right now was an undisturbed sleep to properly restore his physical and mental state. "As long as you're not an idiot, it's fine." Roland nodded, looked at God of the Bound Toltsona, who seemed listless, and after thinking for a moment, said, "Black Knight has taken down God's Sponsea. She just contacted me asking how to deal with it." Chapter 374, What is a God Spawn used for? The God of the Bound Toltsona was stunned for a moment upon hearing this. He forced himself to gather his spirits and looked at Roland. Roland also looked at him and then asked, "Do you have any thoughts?" "Little Two, He is, after all, your child. The god of the bound Tulsana's face showed a pained and disgusted expression upon hearing this. He said, he is not my child, he is just a monster. Don't have any expectations for the god Sponsea. He has no humanity, he is just a monster. The god of the bound Tulsana paused, looked at Roland, and reminded him. He was worried that Roland would see the god Sponsea as someone like himself, who couldn't help himself, or a child who had been led astray. But the god of the bound Tulsana knew that wasn't the case. The god Sponsea wasn't a child who had been led astray, he was evil from birth, a symbol of extreme wickedness, the ultimate in indulgence. The god Sponsea not only represented the mother tree's child and claw in this world but also symbolized the evil side of the aberrant pathway. Roland raised his eyebrows upon hearing this, showing no surprise. He said, I understand. I won't have any expectations for him, but I won't kill him either, at least not for now. The god of the bound Tulsana looked at him with confusion and astonishment. Roland hooked his lips and said with a smile, Saya is a child acknowledged by the mother tree. There is a connection between them, both in bloodline and in mysticism. Keeping Saya might bring a little surprise to the mother tree in the future. Children of the mother tree are common, but children like the god Sponsea, who have a close relationship with the mother tree, are not common. And in the field of mysticism, there are many things that can be done by utilizing such blood relations and mystical connections. Hearing this, the god of the bound Tulsana's brows relaxed. He then reminded, the mother tree is very dangerous. Halfway through his reminder, the god of the bound Tulsana suddenly paused because he remembered the actions of the person in front of him. In a sense, this person was even more dangerous than the mother tree. Don't worry, although I strategically underestimate them, I won't truly underestimate any outer gods. Roland looked at the god of the bound Tulsana, who looked unsure whether to continue reminding him, smiled, and said. Then Roland paused, as if he had thought of something, and said with a slight hint of distress, I was originally counting on you to handle the follow-up matters for the Rose School of Thought. Now that you look so weak, alas, Medici is going to scold me again. I'm sorry, please give me some time. I will recover quickly and take over the relevant work. The god of the bound Tulsana showed an apologetic expression upon hearing this. Although still weak, he still tried hard to appear more energetic. All right, you should rest well. I'm not going to exploit an injured person. Sleep, sleep. Roland waved his hand and pushed the god of the bound Tulsana into a room in the alternate space to rest. The god of the bound Tulsana clearly wanted to struggle a bit, but his condition was truly poor, so he finally obediently lay down and slept. Good night, little Tuo. When you wake up, it will be another beautiful day. Roland said so. After arranging for the god of the bound Tulsana to rest, Roland yawned and left the alternate space with Bethel, arriving at Mist Town. Mist Town, which usually didn't even have a living soul in sight, was exceptionally lively at the moment. The Evernight goddess was chatting with the sun god, probably reminiscing. Antigonus was squatting in front of a mythical creature that seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep, occasionally poking it curiously with his claws. Amon, who was likely a clone, stood beside Antigonus. He was clearly also curious about the thing on the ground, but he didn't reach out to touch it like Antigonus. And not far from the few people, on the rooftop, Zeratul, who was still hanging there, had a stiff expression. It was clear that he was trying hard to reduce his sense of presence. It was hard to say if this was useful, as no one had noticed him in the first place. Is this the god Sponsea? Roland's gaze fell on the mythical creature in front of Antigonus, then he frowned and said with some disgust, so ugly. Can't he maintain a human form? He also said to Antigonus, don't play with this dirty thing. Do you still want your claws? Antigonus's expression immediately stiffened, and he immediately jumped back 3 meters, proving his obedience with his actions. Then Antigonus didn't know where he pulled out a handkerchief and meticulously wiped his claws. In a short while, his claws were wiped clean and even reflective. Not bad, it's better for the demon wolf to be clean. Roland nodded in satisfaction upon seeing this and then looked at the Evernight goddess and the sun god, who had stopped talking, and asked, how did the god Sponsea become like this? It's not surprising that Roland asked this, as the god Sponsea on the ground looked rather unsightly. The overall feeling was very evil, unlike ordinary mythical creatures, but rather a sense of distortion, looking very unpleasant to the eyes. There were also multiple lacerations on his body, but they didn't look like injuries inflicted by outsiders. Instead, they seemed to be wounds caused by changes within his body. The mother tree attempted to make the god spawn Seiya self-destruct at the last moment. I stopped him, the sun god explained. The Evernight goddess didn't refute the sun god's words and said with a smile, apparently, the mother tree is very unwilling for her child to fall into our hands. Understood. If it were me, I wouldn't want something so closely connected to me to fall into the enemy's hands either. Roland nodded in understanding. How do you plan to deal with him? The Evernight goddess then asked. Of course, lock him up and study him. He is the best sample for studying the mother tree's power, and this reproductive characteristic. Roland smiled at this point, thinking of the mushrooms Frank had researched through the descendants of Zar, who were noticed by the original moon in the original work. He couldn't help but look at the god spawn Seiya with a little more expectation, saying, perhaps it can bring us some surprises, such as solving the problem of food production. Although the mother tree doesn't directly symbolize motherhood like the mother goddess, she also possesses a part of the authority of reproduction. Upon hearing this, the expressions of the people present immediately became strange. They had not yet experienced the power of the Mushroom King, so they couldn't understand Roland's thinking for a while. But no one raised any objection to this handling. The most responsible sun god, however, subtly reminded, be careful of pollution. He wasn't afraid of the mother tree's power polluting Roland, he was mainly afraid of polluting the food. Don't worry, I have a sense of proportion. Roland smiled, then looked at the Evernight goddess and said, although protecting Earth is everyone's responsibility, I still want to thank you for your help this time. Chapter 375, Visiting the God of Wisdom. I also have you to thank for clearing out the Rose School of Thought, that tumor. The Evernight goddess looked at him, her gaze gentle, seeming to be in a good mood. Without the god of the bound Toltsuna and the god spawn Seiya, the mother tree will have a much harder time taking any further action. This is also something I should do. Roland smiled, also in a good mood, and continued, after I've sorted out the gains from this time, you can choose a portion from it as compensation, or if there's anything you want, you can bring it up now. Although protecting the world is everyone's responsibility, the compensation that should be given still must be given. Roland wouldn't ignore her contributions just because it was the Evernight goddess's responsibility. There's no need for compensation, but if you manage to research a result regarding the mother tree's power, I hope I can know the relevant details. The Evernight goddess said. Compared to other insignificant compensation, she clearly valued Roland's research on outer gods more. This isn't strange. As the saying goes, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. As enemies of Earth, the outer gods are naturally something the Evernight goddess would collect information on. It's not that she hadn't thought about researching outer gods before, after all, their pollution is truly terrifying, and everyone needs to be wary of it. But precisely because the outer gods' pollution is terrifying, the Evernight goddess's progress in this area has almost always been zero, without any significant results. But just because she couldn't research anything doesn't mean Roland couldn't either. After all, in a sense, he can truly be called an expert in the outer gods' domain. Alright, I will give you a copy of the relevant information later, and I will notify you when I research a result. Roland nodded indifferently. He didn't mind sharing his research on outer gods with others. Upon hearing this, the Evernight goddess's lips curved up. She was clearly satisfied with this result. Because the star realm still needed the Evernight goddess to go back and continue sealing the cracks, the sun god's power was only temporary after all. The Evernight goddess didn't stay for long. After chatting with Roland for a few more sentences, mainly discussing their views on various outer gods, the Evernight goddess took her leave and returned to the star realm. After Black Knight left, Roland glanced at the god spawn Seiya on the ground with a slight look of disgust. Then, he thought for a few seconds, looked at Bethel beside him, and asked, can it be sealed inside something? Otherwise, it's not very easy to carry. Yes, I can temporarily seal it inside a gem. Bethel nodded, and a beautiful red gem appeared in his hand. He then snapped his fingers, and the red gem emitted a brilliant light that shone down on the god spawn Seiya, sucking the god spawn Seiya into it. Alright, Bethel said, and just as he was about to hand the red gem to Roland, he saw the latter take half a step back in disgust. "How about Bethel, you hold onto it?" Roland blinked, suggesting, and then said with disgust, "After all, it's really too ugly." Bethel's movement paused. He glanced at Roland helplessly, nodded, and said, "Okay." He didn't think the god spawn Seiya was that ugly. Mainly because he had seen too many strange and grotesque things during the fourth epoch, he had become immune. Bethel was just surprised that Roland had such a side to him. But thinking back carefully, Bethel realized that Roland wasn't like this just starting today. He had actually been a face value enthusiast all along, it was just that he hadn't shown it so obviously before. Bethel didn't have any opinion on this. After all, he himself actually liked beautiful things too, such as various gems, so he just asked, "What do we do next?" "After this, of course, we'll deal with the Rose School of Thought's mess. We can't rely on Little Tuo for now. I hope Rynette can be of some use, otherwise, I'm really afraid Little Red will die suddenly." Roland clearly had a plan in mind long ago, and he spoke unhurriedly. He first looked at Bethel and instructed, "Bethel, you first take the god spawn Seiya to the biological laboratory in the Forsaken Land of the Gods and explain the relevant situation there. Before I go over, keep the god spawn Seiya in a sealed state. With the true creator watching over things there, you don't have to worry about accidents, and honestly, given the state of the Forsaken Land of the Gods, even if an accident happens, there's nothing to fear, as there aren't many people. The biological laboratory was built a few days ago, and relevant personnel such as Frank and others had naturally already started relevant research in the lab. However, because the time was short and there was a lack of high-end materials, the lab hadn't made much good progress. But Roland believed that the appearance of the god spawn Seiya as a research material would definitely bring some surprises to Frank. He just hoped this surprise wouldn't become a fright for this world. Roland silently added a sentence in his heart. He still held a bit of reverence for the Mushroom King, after all, he was that man. Roland then thought of something and looked at the sun god, saying, "Right, Grisha, do you want to come with me to meet the 2-5 dragon? I need to talk to the 2-5 dragon about the 200 assistants." Roland originally wasn't in a hurry to meet with the god of knowledge and wisdom, but plans couldn't keep up with changes. Seeing that the work over there was piling up, and someone was really about to die suddenly, Roland felt that he should first settle the matter of the assistants. It just so happened that this time they had reclaimed the god of the bound Toltsana and captured the god spawn Seiya. Their side could be said to be in full swing. Taking advantage of this momentum to visit the 2-5 dragon would be best. 2-5 dragon. The sun god was momentarily stunned before realizing who this referred to. Then, he thought for a second, nodded, and said, "All right. He really should meet Heliborgen." When Heliborgen was visited, he was trying to contact the Evernight goddess and attempting to obtain some information about Roland's actions this time from her. This isn't strange. As the god of knowledge and wisdom, and having the reputation of being a true standing god, how could Heliborgen not pay attention to the series of events happening in the Star Realm recently? Even if Heliborgen didn't discover Roland's existence in time initially due to regional reasons, he should have known when the other party brought Rosal to attack the Steam Divine Kingdom. It's just that Heliborgen is a very patient deity, so he didn't choose to act directly but first observed and collected information. This collection allowed him to learn many of Roland's deeds, mainly from Rosal, who exchanged a lot of information with him when he visited Heliborgen with Steam. Of course, this was also the result Roland tacitly allowed. He didn't mind the 7 gods knowing his existence, and was even happy about it. Precisely because of this, Heliborgen further understood what a terrifying existence Roland was. This made him increasingly cautious, while observing the other party's various actions and contemplating how exactly to make contact with the other party. And under these circumstances, Heliborgen discovered the Evernight goddess's unusual movements, and subsequently discovered Roland's actions targeting the Rose School of Thought. Heliborgen was both startled and curious about this. In order to further understand this matter, he chose to contact the Evernight goddess to exchange for relevant information. However, Heliborgen also didn't expect that just as he had contacted the Evernight goddess, someone had already come to visit, and even brought the sun god along. Sensing the presence of the 2 people outside his divine kingdom, Helleborgen remained silent for a few seconds, politely ended his communication with the Evernight goddess, and then took a deep breath. What must come will always come. It was finally time for him to face it. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.